Welcome back to the Masters of Materium, and this is going to be the beefiest episode we've ever done because the Mirandus team just did the beefiest AMA ever. So, Grill, I think we have a ton of stuff to talk about, but before we get into that, Grill, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the AMA, just overall reactions, and then I'd love to hear from Ilham as well.
Yeah, no, the AMA was quite possibly the most important one they've done yet. Really enjoyed watching it. Looking forward to getting into these playtests that are coming up. Excited for that. I know you went to the offsite in Texas. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so a handful of us got invited to Austin. Grill and Ilham got invited as well, but just couldn't make it because they were in Asia. But yeah, it was a real honor to be invited, and it was an incredible experience. I mean, first of all, everyone in the Mirandus team is awesome. You could tell they're true experts at their craft. Can also confirm that Manny is as happy in real life as he is on video. Really enjoyed talking with Manny, great guy. And, McCarthy is one of my favorite thinkers ever. I mean, just seeing him think, bouncing ideas off of him, just hearing him think about things is just incredible. I've always been a fan of it on video, and to spend basically 2.5 days with him in person was incredible. And it's kind of a dream come true, because I don't know if you guys remember when we created Mom, we talked about being able to kind of co-create the game with the developers, and here we are. I did spend a lot of time working on a heavy paper, specifically kind of focusing more on the economics and economic mechanisms. Ilham helped me as well, and Grill, I saw you added a bunch of comments. I'm going to do a 2.0 version, and yeah, we went over that, which was great. I think McCarthy's vision of how he wants the economy to work is very, very similar to mine and the way I think it should be done. And McCarthy wants us to win, and I think that's really important. I think a lot of people are a little bit disillusioned with Gala, and I think one of the most important sayings, which, by the way, McCarthy didn't know this, but I told him, are you aware that we say in McCarthy we trust? So he was a little bit, he blushed a little bit when I said that, but yeah, it was cool. And I did get a chance to experience the upcoming play tests. Got to be a little bit careful what I say, but as we go through the AMA, I'm going to add a lot of color commentary that's going to clarify or go a bit deeper on some of the key points. And, I don't want to break the trust of things I'm not supposed to say, but I'm pretty sure there's a lot of things we can go deeper into, and it'll be fun. So with no further ado, I think we're ready. But before we do that, Ilham, what was your reactions on the AMA?
Yeah, I enjoyed it. It was perhaps the best of the AMAs that we've seen, certainly the longest without question. And even beyond the AMA, they spent probably a good nearly an hour in Discord further answering people's questions and highlighting various aspects and stuff. The quality of the actual content of the AMA was considerably better than previous as well, and they cleared up a lot of concepts that we've been thinking about and wondering how it's actually going to come to light. And I was quite impressed overall, and obviously we're going to go into all the details, and we'll see how things actually looked.
Awesome. Grill, roll the footage.
All right. First video up is a little zone porn. It shows some of the stuff they've been working on. Here's a good example.
This is Lake area. Have some big roads in the background, and just kind of an overgrown area. Yeah, so this big river that kind of connects everything through the level, and so we're going to be placing boulders around and just kind of creating areas for enemies to hide.
Favorite area yet?
Yeah.
This little shallow, that's so cool.
Yeah, those sandy shapes.
This is beautiful.
I want a kayak there.
Yeah. But yeah, it's been coming along. Been pretty happy with the progress everyone's making.
So cool. Love it.
Yeah, this is an area from one of Hugo's concepts. It's pretty sweet.
Cloud Shadows.
And then this is my area. This is the mountain peaks here, heading towards the tree bridge section.
Oh my God, new favorite area.
And again, some of it is shallow, but some of it is deep. We'll see. We'll figure it out later. And then you can climb the top and walk across it from one cave to the other cave. This is the cave that you see. It's kind of a cavern, and I need to make some changes in here, but it's still temp.
That naked backpacker.
Beautiful.
It looks amazing. I think it's cool to see the art, the wallpaper come to life. Elam, any reactions?
I do like how the kind of shallow river acts more or less as like a highway through the zone. Kind of a point where you'd expect a lot of people gathering to travel. A lot of verticality in that zone, so that'll give plenty of vantage points maybe for like archers and the like. It'd be kind of some narrow paths and as well. I heard that they're going to be at some point adding in fall damage as well, and given all that, this could become a little dangerous, especially if you have mobs that can knock you back or anything. So it's going to be interesting how that plays out. With that said, it's continuously looking better with each further iteration of the world that they're showing us.
Yeah, I really like the waterfalls. Almost looked like they were little gems in there, flickering lights. Grill?
Yeah, new zones look great. They seem like they're just getting better and better at it. Possibly like one of the early zones maybe was lacking some textures, but the later ones in that clip looked almost perfect, if there is such a thing.
Yeah, so I had dinner. Me, Forge, had dinner with the Mirandus team. We talked about kind of a zone generating tool, because if you look at UE5, there's like planet creation tools, and there's all these systems you can use to create assets very quickly. And we talked about zones, and the devs seem to think it'd be possible. For an example, you could have a bunch of parameters. Hey, I want a desert, give me a dungeon, tune the difficulty, all of these things, and you could just spit out zones quickly. So I think at some point, hopefully they'll do that, and obviously have a human being go in there after the zone's generated and just spice it up with some little details. So yeah, because I think we all need a lot of zones for the game to really come to life. I mean, we've talked a lot about how many zones do we need, but it's a lot. All right, next one's one of my favorite clips, so let's roll it, Grill.
Next, we got a short clip here of some of the Harvestables that'll be in, I'm guessing, the next playtest.
This is Glory Mars.
Beautiful.
New Harvestables. We got 3 ores, farming plot with grains, and plants.
Oh,
They're so
Look awesome.
pretty.
beautiful.
And
You're going to see
they're
all
white.
this in the game very soon.
Yeah, it's one of my favorite clips because I've been a huge proponent of having as much variety as possible for plants and for ores. So it looks like we have 5 ores, 16 harvestable plants. And I think one of the things I'm hoping for the most, and as I talked with the team, I really emphasize this, like you need as much complexity as possible, and you need as much unique utility as possible. So if, let's say, there's 16 plants and they kind of all do the same thing, then there's not that much value compared to having 16 plants that do 16 different things. But Elam, I know you're obviously farming is a huge part of your upcoming vision and missions. What was your reaction?
In terms of the Harvestables, they certainly expanded beyond the previous playtest, which only had flax and wheat. It also actually appears as though they may have like potentially different varieties of wheats, if I'm not mistaken. My plant knowledge is not the greatest, but at least from what I'm seeing there and comparing to other games, like let's say compared to WoW and Total Herbs and such, there's more various plant types than there would be at, say, the early phases of something like WoW. That's going to add quite a lot of variety. I think they could potentially even do more than that to add even additional depth, but I'm quite satisfied with what I'm seeing at this point in time. In terms of the actual minerals, it seems like they have copper, silver, gold, and platinum, and maybe there's one other, maybe like basic stone or something. I would have liked if they potentially made the ores look a little different, not just reskins or recolors of the same ores, but the variety is going to be nice for sure. So yeah, I'm satisfied with what I'm seeing at this point in time.
Grill, you pumped?
Yeah, no, everything looks good. I do like the increased variety. I agree with Animal there. I think it's going to offer a lot of economic opportunities. Also, open up a lot of different opportunities for different types of crafting and such. And I agree. I think maybe they just reskin them for now. Hopefully, they give them all kind of unique looks later on for the ore, because it's kind of boring if every ore in the game looked like just a chunk of rock with different colors.
You know, the other way they can create a lot of complexity is by combining different plants together or different ores together, which is kind of what Star Atlas has done. There's like 9 base resources, but there's over 30 different recipes. So you can kind of craft a tier 1 recipe and then combine 2 tier 1 recipes to create a tier 2 recipe, and so on and so forth. So I did chat with the team about that, and yeah, we'll see what they do. But all right, next one for all the gore fans out there, they'll be excited.
Yeah, this is part of a longer clip. The original clip was pretty long, so I cut down to the part which I thought was most important here, which is some of the UI effects of the new blood effects.
Actually, where it was splattering on the screen, so that this will be in combination with our UX to let you know which direction you'll be hit from. So this is his test, showing it in all different directions. And so when these effects are used in the actual game, you'll know which direction you're being hit from. You'll have a sense of how much it's hitting you. And then we can use those same effects on the things that you're hitting in the world. So it's going to be very cohesive and very bloody.
So I especially being it's a kind of a first-person game, those directional damage signals are really important, right? I mean, if you're getting hit from behind, it's good to know you're getting hit from behind or hit from the right or hit from the left. So like where they're going with it, and yeah, looks pretty cool. Elam?
Yeah, that adds a lot to combat. Just from the last playtest, if you're getting hit from behind, you knew you were getting hit, but you weren't exactly knowing where you were getting hit from. And typically what you would do is kind of run away and then pan your camera to see kind of what was happening. Now you know exactly what's happening. And more importantly, you know what kind of damage you're doing. So if you're seeing like a huge blood splatter, you're like, okay, this is something I need to deal with like right now, versus, a little tiny drip of blood, and it's something like you can probably finish off the mob in front of me before I need to really focus on what's happening behind me or to the side of me or whatever. That adds a lot to combat. I like it. I don't think I've really seen that in other games. They probably have some that have something similar, but that's an interesting concept, one that I hadn't thought of previously.
Grill?
I think they did a really good job. I like the information it gives. Looks really nice. My only thing is, especially in the first-person game, we have such a limited kind of field of view that much at the edge of your screen becomes almost a little distracting, or makes it a lot harder. Then again, it's going to be, game's supposed to be hard, so if your vision is being limited by a ton of blood in your screen, it's going to make things even harder to see. That I have seen that in other games. I can't recall which ones. Not so much the blood, but the directional damage in a first-person game. I just like them. I tend to like that to be a little more subtle, but that's the direction they want to go. It's something we have to play around.
One thing I'm curious about is if we're fighting a creature, are we going to get very clear signals using the blood splatter in terms of the amount of damage we're going to be generating? Because I did chat with the team, and they did say they're going to hide all the stats, with the last play test, we could basically see all the creature stats. So if we don't know the stats, I mean, one, you can kind of keep tabs and notes or spreadsheets like Elam does on the damage that's being generated, how many blows it took to kill a creature. But it's quite possible that that blood splatter is going to be one of the most important signals in terms of how much damage we created, because I think we talk about it a little bit later, but damage types is going to be a big thing, and figuring out what the best damage type is for each type of creature is probably going to be a really big deal. So Grill, Ilum, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I think figuring out what's effective versus what's not goes for lots of different RPG games as well. And maybe something is resistant to slashing or piercing or blunt or fire or whatever. Figuring out what's the most effective. And they said they would put in the last AMA, they said they were going to put indicators for that as well. Getting that knowledge is a big advantage.
Yellow?
Yeah, it's significantly harder to tell mob statistics, not just given the fact that they don't just upfront and tell us, but if there's such things as like vulnerabilities and resistances, and if mobs have armor or damage reduction, that sort of thing, that makes it much more difficult to see what's actually better versus not. Like, let's say a mob has 100 health and they don't tell us that, and we're using a weapon that does 9 to 11 damage per hit, and it takes us 10 hits to kill it. You can count the number of hits multiplied by your top damage versus multiplied by your smallest damage, and then over a course of kills you can average out and get a pretty close indication of what exactly the total health is, even if you're not seeing the damage numbers. But if they add in things like resistances and vulnerabilities and such, critical hits and the like, that becomes much more difficult to actually calculate, unless there's a way that you can easily visualize that something is a crit or the magnitude of the crit versus the magnitude of the resist, etc. So regardless, it'll be much more complex and harder to get accurate mob statistics.
Plus, if they add RNG to the creature stats, meaning some creatures will be a little tougher, some will be a little easier, that'll really make things harder to track. So.
Yeah, for sure. They did mention at some point that they would have potentially different sizes of mobs, so you at least get a minor indication. If a mob's bigger, you'd expect it to say have more hit points. But yeah, I agree. That just adds an additional level of complexity in determining mob statistics.
All right, next, some beautiful, cool art.
Yep, updated cemetery art. Let's take a look.
I'm working on a new cemetery design. So the old one was more classic in a way. This one is more original, and I would much prefer the fact we have stacking stones and smoke, incense, and maybe bells could be very cool. So you have a big one, 20 by 20 meters. You have a medium one and a small one. And you can, the one on the left is the small one, the 10 by 10, I guess. And yeah, that's a new design we have been working on.
These are awesome.
Yeah, love them. That's awesome.
There's, having bells and things in there, guys, means that, when you're in town, you can maybe hear it almost like a subtle wind chime. Can kind of guide you and take you over to it. You'll know that a cemetery is near. But if someone respawns and they've spent Materium, maybe the large bell kind of tolls and rings. So,
yes.
Cool.
How cool would it be to have kind of that audio component? You can hear the gong, like, oh my God, somebody came back.
Like in the beginning of Hell's Bells by AC/DC.
Yeah, well, and imagine that you're in town and that bell's just going nuts. Like, something happened, something horrible happened.
Yeah, that was fun.
Yeah, I'm smiling. I love the whole bell idea. Couple of details that McCarthy revealed about cemeteries. So yeah, the stone stacking will basically reveal how many people have purchased a res. And then the number of purchasable reses per deed are going to be based on the size. So basically, a small cemetery is going to have less reses available or max reses available compared to a large or a grand cemetery. But yeah, I really love the concept. Grill, thoughts?
I think they look cool, a little more like almost a little more fantasy than like the traditional one. Interesting thing about the stones, and then they're going to be limited in that way. So if you're out in the wild and you want to find yourself someplace a little closer to your farm, you may not have that available to you, which means if you die, you can wind up being quite far away from where you were originally. I didn't really think of something like that.
Ilum?
Well, being farther away, you could use to your advantage too, right? It's kind of like a, in quotes, free teleport. So I wouldn't say that's completely a negative thing. I do like how they show the cemetery, large cemetery, and grand cemetery. The general look is quite a bit better than I expected. The whole bell thing, I think, is amazing. Like you hear the bell going absolutely wild. You're like, okay, Brute's outside the gate, kind of thing. So, or a whole raid wipe because people were wiped on a boss or whatever. I do very much like that. One thing, I'm not sure if this comes later, but they were talking about like a kingdom fee associated with the cemeteries as well. I wasn't terribly fond about, given I think that significantly takes away from the actual cemetery prices also.
Yeah, then see the notes. Actually, let's talk about that. That was one of the things I wanted to cover. So obviously the team wants to make sure that we did spend a lot of time talking about Materium sinks. I think the overall vision McCarthy has is, Materium is going to flow. Let Materium flow. Thank you. And for that to work long term and not get hyperinflation and the token crashes and all that stuff, you need a lot of sinks. So obviously we know that spell casting is going to cost Materium, and the team is going to set those prices. And I guess basically they're seeing cemetery reses as a similar thing. And yeah, I was surprised a little bit by that. So just to make sure everybody's clear, the team is going to set a minimum price for resurrections, and then the cemetery owners can add something on top of that. Another thing that's worth noting is, and I think it was shown in one of the clips, maybe Grill has it or not, but everybody's going to have a token basically stuck in their inventory that's going to revive them back into King's March, right? Or basically back to the Citadel, I think. That's going to be for the playtest. I don't know if that's going to be the case when the real game launches. So, but yeah, Grill, opinions?
I think a base fee is an okay thing, though I necessarily hate the base fee. Like I said, I think the players could have probably handled that on their own, and there's going to be some competition within graveyard owners anyway for the additional fee. I do agree with you that there needs to be as many things as possible. Things probably will get out of control. You see that in some other MMOs where the inflation of the in-game currency just winds up being rampant.
One thing that's worth talking about is like McCarthy blew my plan. I mean, my plan was to give out free reses. So that was the thing that he's basically countering, and he did mention that in the AMA. I like that. I mean, I think, and I did talk with the devs. And this is going to sound a little weird maybe to you guys, but I'm like, you guys got to think about what Mom's going to do. Like we own more than a quarter of the game, and you got to make it mom proof. Like we're going to help you build a better game because we're basically going to try to break everything. So I think is this mechanic mom proof or not is a great question that Mirandus devs should be asking themselves. So
my biggest concern with this, the fact that they're putting it on a player-owned asset, is what stops them then from putting on a base fee to say use a butchery or a base fee to use a dairy because they need more sinks, etc. So it opens up a bad precedent for potentially future changes that I see simply erode from asset owners' earning potential.
Can't argue against that. Very, very valid point. Alrighty. Next.
Up next, got a cool clip about things people have been asking about a lot, apparently. Not necessarily always so up to date on the current trends in the Mirandus chat on Gala Discord, but here's a little clip on torches.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got couple torches here. One's in my inventory, one's equipped, and I've got a little bar that shows like how much time is left on it. And they each have their own separate timers, and they're paused while you don't have it out. When you bring it out,
Come on, let's go.
so this is some temporary stuff. Looks pretty good for now. We had Brad help with the lighting, making sure the lighting projects out far properly.
Cool.
And I believe G is working on the effects. I just found some torch thing and put it on here, but it's looking pretty cool so far. That's about it.
You can swing that as a club too, right?
Yes, it is a weapon. It's actually the club weapon, but extended into a torch.
Yeah, it'll be the same general mechanics of any other weapon, just won't do as much damage.
All right, I'm going to drop some alpha here as well. So we talked about lanterns. I didn't talk about lanterns in the AMA. In Austin, we did. So if you hold a lantern, you're going to lose a hand, meaning, basically only going to have one hand for a weapon. I don't know if you can swing the lantern like you can with the torch, but here's, and this was one of the honestly disappointing elements that came out of the Austin event. That includes the lantern of the sun. So if you got a lantern of the sun, that just got nerfed heavily. You're going to lose a hand. And then McCarthy was like, well, basically you got to take the noobs and make them the torch bearers. that's going to be their job as you're going out in the wild. So we did talk about that nerf to the lantern of the sun, and McCarthy did just haphazardly drop. Maybe there'll be a ring of the sun where you could craft the lantern into a ring or something down the line with enough Materium or enough mastery. But Yak, what's your thoughts and reactions in terms of the torches and the lanterns, and how do you think that's going to play out in the game, guys? Because obviously light is a big deal, and especially if you're a group and you want to go hunt at night. How do you guys see that playing out? We'll start with Grill.
It's funny that he's mentioned like the news with the torches. I would actually probably give torches or lanterns to people who are good players, just because that could be the difference between wiping at night or not if you can see. I think that's actually kind of an important job. Usually, like when I used to run raids back in the earlier days of WoW, all those specialty jobs would always go to some of the best players in the whole raid because I can trust them. Overall, I don't mind the losing the hand to the torch. Like I said, I think those are important roles. I think the lighting looks really good. And on the land of the sun a little bit. They could add additional utility to it in other ways. Maybe, sure, you can't just equip it and be like a giant walking flashlight with a sword and board out, but maybe you could, has some kind of ability, you can like make it flash and blind enemies where they can't see for a few seconds or swing or their defenses go down. I think there's other ways they can keep the lantern relevant and powerful.
I actually love that idea. I don't know if you guys have seen that in home defense situations, but there's special tactical flashlights you can use that will literally blind people. It's like it flashes really fast and completely disorients people. So yeah, Ilan, what's your thoughts? How do you think it's going to change gameplay?
So a few things right off the top. I noticed that they said damage 4 to 4. Now, of course, that's all subject to change. With that said, anything that has a fixed damage amount, say one specific amount, makes it much easier to calculate mob hit points and the like. So something like that, as opposed to a weapon that does, say, 2 to 6 damage, and you're never really sure exactly how much your damage you're doing because you don't see damage numbers. This kind of weapon, using this to, say, kill a mob from full health to 0 would make getting the mob statistics much easier, if that's the case. Losing a hand with the Lantern of the Sun was one of the kind of benefits that, because you didn't lose it before in the previous playtest, and that was one of the huge benefits of the Lantern of the Sun. I always kind of pictured it as like maybe like a long necklace type thing that just kind of illuminated the surroundings and you were free to do whatever. In that case, given that the Lantern of the Sun more or less is just a glorified permanent torch at this point, yeah, I agree. That's like an enormous nerf, and I'm almost kind of happy I don't actually own one at this point. Now, with regards to the actual timers on the torches, when the time runs out, what happens? Does it become just your basic club? Does it just stop illuminating? Does it like vanish from your hand or burn to a crisp, or do you automatically swap in another torch of the same type? That's something I'd like to see, because that gives quite a few different options. Also, I'm wondering if you could potentially like dual wield torches. You have multiple different slots, right? So that's one of the possibility. I wonder about the damage type as well. Obviously, the torches are fire, so are we talking just basic blunt damage because it's a club, or are we getting blunt damage plus fire? Can you light the mobs on fire? Will it, as you guys previously mentioned, will it blind the mobs? Potentially add a vulnerability in that respect as well. I was a little disappointed that they only did the first person shot with the torch. I would have liked to see a third person shot from the perspective of another person, just to see how much illumination actually is given compared to the surroundings, and whether or not that illumination is directed at all. As we've seen from the Lantern of the Sun before, the Lantern of the Sun kind of was like a flashlight in front of you. So I'm not sure if this gives like a 360-degree illumination, and how much illumination it gives to other players, or if this is just an on-person illumination. But the fact that they want to have torchbearers suggests that it's kind of full party wide or group wide, whatever. Yeah, no, I very much like the torches. Is something that I would have liked to have had in the previous playtest, to say the least. And there's a lot they can do and direction they can go with this.
One thing I love is that it's consumable. So again, we don't know if you'll lose the wood, but the fact that they're going to have a short lifespan is a great thing. So the more consumables there are in the game, the better. All right, Grill. Next one's exciting one. Roll it.
Yeah, from this point forward, it's all kind of the stuff that McCarthy was talking about in like the later half of the AMA about the upcoming tech tests and some in-game mechanics. We'll start with the announcement of the 2 tests
that are coming up. The first, we really just need a straight help us break Mirandus test, looking at the network LOD specifically, making sure there's no memory leaks, because we had some of those last time. So the first one we're calling Field of Battle, but it's really probably going to be more of a deer slaughter. The idea is maybe some rolling meadows. We actually have that, don't we? Let's not show a pic. We'll save that for later. Kind of a rolling meadow, maybe a little pond or a stream running through it. We want you guys to try to spawn in. We're really going to need your help. We're going to try to get 500, 600, 700 of you, 800 of you on at the same time. Everyone will have a bow, maybe 200, 300 deer walking around in a large herd, some wolves chasing them, but just really get to that 1,000 living things in a zone and have you guys firing a bunch of projectiles and try to create kind of the worst case scenario and help us break it. Once we do that and we're feeling settled that we can have that massive number of people in a zone all performing certain actions, there will be some crafting, you can make more arrows and a few things like that. Once we have all of that in hand and we're positive that's working well, then the second tech test will be in an area, and I still think we're targeting an area called King's March, and you will be able to play that entire zone, and it will be, a bit like the game will be when it goes live. So there'll be a full zone with the, Materium is probably the biggest switch that we would do in King's March, which is you guys will be able to load the game. We're going to be able to display how much Materium you have in your Gala chain wallet, and when you spend it, you can spend it, and when you kill goblins, you can earn it. So the next tech test is like, make sure nothing breaks, and if that's looking good, then we'll go live with number 2, which is your ability to actually start earning. And we feel like that's really important. You guys have waited a long time. You want a test to go live that allows you to earn, and we're excited to give that to you. We're excited to give that to you. And it helps us too, guys, right? You can see all of the stuff that has to be tied together to have that work, especially the connection to Gala chain itself. So we need to be able to test that. So you guys will be able to earn, and we'll get a chance to pound on the tech. So that'll be really, really great.
Yeah, I think we can skip talking about the first play test, which is going to be cool, but obviously the exciting play tests is going to be the persistent one. And let's go deep into this. And I know Grill, there's another clip later talking about resets and seasons. We might as well just tie that into this. So the game plan is that they're going to give us essentially seasons, meaning that there's going to be a play test for maybe a week. And then we go in there, we play the game. And after that week's over, they're going to take down the server for maybe whatever, a day, 2 days, 3 days, whatever, however long it takes. They're going to add maybe more content, to retune things, maybe change certain things in a zone, and then put the server back on. And McCarthy's vision is that the seasons are going to get longer and longer and longer. And one of the things he mentioned is he eventually wants like a season to be like 3 months or something. So I really like that. I think in terms of rolling out more zones and rolling out more content and rolling out more mechanics, it's a great way to do it, right? Because we get a chance to get in the game, earn some Materium, and then it's going to get better and better over time. I mean, I think the last playtest was pretty exciting and we didn't have really that much content, so to speak. So it's going to be a really cool way to roll it out over time. Grill, reactions?
I mean, this is what we've been waiting for, right? It's a game with play to earn that we can play continuously, even if there's some short breaks. I was hoping that the original version of it would be more than just one zone, but if they can expand on that relatively quickly, I can see it staying pretty fun and interesting to play for a long time. I still look forward to the day where things are permanent. I realize it's going to take some time, but if they can keep updating content at a relatively quick rate, I think we're at the verge of something really special.
Hello.
I want to mention the first playtest first because that's coming up closer, and they did say that there will be no Materium earnings for the first playtest, which I think is kind of a bad choice, because if you want a lot of people in a zone, that's one way to get them there without question. I'm not sure if there's going to be any other rewards or what, but to me this seems more like a glorified Goblin Meadows playtest, just with deer and wolves instead. With regards to the actual kind of being close to the full game, it's still missing all of the things that are of actual interest to me personally. Like, there won't be any magic, there won't be any management of the deeds and resource chains and anything of, that design, which is really what interested me with Mirandus in the first place. Now, I'm aware that they're going to start doing that towards the end of the year, but for me, until I actually kind of see that entire vision, I don't really consider it a full game. With regards to Materium earnings, this will be the first time, of course, that we have, on the spot Materium earnings, which is really nice. Although whether you get Materium on the spot versus you get Materium after you do something, the end result is essentially the same. So I personally don't see this as such a big improvement. I am more looking forward to the things previously mentioned.
One thing I'll hint about, because again, they didn't talk about it and I want to break it, but it's going to be basically 2 ways to earn Materium. The first way is pretty obvious. You kill creatures, you kill higher level creatures, magical creatures, as McCarthy calls them, and you're going to get Materium. But there's going to be another way, which is a kind of a great bridge mechanic. And I'll give a big hint for anybody who's playing Star Atlas. It's very similar to the RFRs. There's going to be another way for people to earn Materium. And I think it's a really good, I was surprised that they did that. And it's a really good, again, bridge as they build all these other mechanics. And I'm with you as well, Elam. I mean, I think what I'm excited about is really the business side of Mirandus, running deeds and creating logistical chains and creating all the transport systems and all of the things we're going to need to do to make the game work. And then you add danger and creatures on top of it, and it's just going to be awesome. So anyways, exciting times ahead. But I think, the thing I'm the most excited about is I think this is going to ignite a huge fire of interest for Mirandus. Just the fact people can come in and earn something, unlike other Gala games, which we've seen Death Spiral after Death Spiral. I think it's going to be really good for Gala games and incredibly good for Mirandus. So I would suspect or expect a huge surge in interest in Mirandus when they turn that on. Ilum, do you think this is going to happen? Do you think we're going to see a huge influx of new players?
If it follows the previous trends of the last playtest, we saw our Discord numbers and YouTube subs go up about 50 to 70% within a period of about a week or two. So if history repeats itself, and I suspect it will, I don't see why this wouldn't do that and multiplied by, a factor of multiple on top of that. So yeah, no, I expect this garnishes a lot of interest. A lot of people are probably much more interested in things like the combat and such. So yeah, this is what people are really looking for. Now, with that said, even the combat is a little on the lacking side still. There's no defensive abilities, no blocking, no parrying, as I mentioned, no magic and stuff. So there's still a lot that needs to be done there, but they're definitely going in the right direction. It's nice to see some of this vision come to fruition at this point.
Yeah, but one of my favorite people at the Mirandus team was Phil, the combat guy. He's great. Had some good conversations with him. All right, next clip, Grill.
Next clip is about inventory.
So we talked about inventory quite a bit. One of the things we decided not to do in this game is Tetris, meaning that in some games, if you get a spear, it's like a 1x6, and a shield is a 4x4, and you end up having to kind of Tetrisize things in your inventory. We've kind of made it a little easier in that all items take a 1x1 square, but we don't think that much is going to be able to, not be able to. We don't want stuff to stack because everything only takes up one slot. If you were to get 6, 7 pieces of wood, there's no reason to have a thing with 6 next to it. We actually can have you start filling up your bag like you would expect in real life. And again, most everything we do in Mirandus is about trying to, without being too punitive, simulate a real world, the physical nature of the real world. Anytime that we have that, the game just becomes more intuitive. So imagine a grid, and items will take up 1, unless it's extremely small. If you have a ruby, those would stack. But if you get a big lump of coal or an iron ingot or a sword, or just expect that to all take up 1 slot in your inventory, and it gets quite easy to control that way. And I think it makes sense.
Weight encumbrance, it's coming. That and storage. I mean, we talked a little bit about how storage, storehouses are going to go parabolic in value over time. I think that's going to be true. Well, there'll be vaults and things as well. But yeah, I think weight encumbrance is going to be a huge thing to deal with. And one of the things I suggested, and Ilum, I'm curious what your reactions are to this suggestion. I suggested to the team to create the opportunity to take ore and maybe smelt it down, and you could maybe do that even in a simple forge, down into ingots that would weigh less. And what that would do is it would create more sophisticated logistical opportunities. For an example, you could put a homestead or an outpost next to a mine, take the ore out, process it, reduce the weight, and then be able to transport more of it. So what that does creates an economic opportunity for somebody who has a simple forge next to a mine, and it creates transport optimization opportunities on the weight side. And that's a huge part of Star Atlas. Like, Star Atlas has built it in a way where they want you to craft things deeper in space, so to speak, and then you transport it. So there's a huge kind of game element on the logistical weight optimization side. Curious on your reaction.
So lots of things to comment on here. So first off, with the whole Tetris thing, Tetris for the inventory is more realistic. I personally absolutely hate it, and I'm happy that they're not going that route. With regards to the actual minerals, for the most part, not stacking, I think depending on what you're carrying, that'll make encumbrance a little less important and actual inventory slots much more important, which does increase the value of things that are related to inventory and transport. So horses, conveyors, storehouses potentially by a significant margin. Now, with regards to the storehouses going parabolic in value, that is likely true. However, the fact that they have server wipes and seasons and stuff should combat that to some extent. So once you start getting to the point where storehouse slots start becoming at a premium, you end up getting a server wipe and everything gets reset. So I don't see that becoming too much of an issue at this point. Certainly, I can see that becoming a major issue if it's permanently up. With regards to having a materials and then process before the final processing at a off-site location. Just in terms of like WoW, you can do similar kind of things. The only difference is WoW doesn't actually have encumbrance, but they do have inventory slots. So let's say you have a stack of ore. You could then go to a nearby village or whatever and smelt that ore into ingots. And typically you could have more materials to go per unit space. So I'll give an example. So let's say a steel bar in WoW uses iron plus coal, I think it is. So you take two items that are taking up inventory slots and you combine it into something that only takes up one inventory slot. Even though that's not directly based on encumbrance, the same rules apply where you're condensing your requirement to carry things. And I very much like that. It gives additional value to places like small homesteads that might be running a simple forge, or outposts that could be running a simple forge or a forge or something before finally processing into the larger materials or higher rarity materials at, say, a grand forge or whatever. So yeah, no, I like it. I like where they're going with it. I would like to see more. Simple as that.
Grill, thoughts on encumbrance and inventory?
Yeah, it's gonna be at a premium for sure. It's like that in a lot of other RPGs too, where it's either encumbrance or amount of slots you have. I am glad that they are not doing Tetris. I played a lot of Diablo and Path of Exile in my life, and I think I've had enough inventory Tetris to fulfill about 100 lifetimes. And as for kind of condensing raw materials into other things to save space, I think that kind of plays into something I have to talk about with outposts or well-placed deeds, where those will be the first points of gathering for those materials, and some basic refinement can be done before they're shipped off to larger establishments such as villages and towns.
I've said this 100 times, and I'll say it another 100 times. The more complexity and utility and unique utility, and the more width and the more resources and the more mechanics there are, the better. And I think that's going to give maximum opportunity to the player base. Things are just too simple. Mom's going to dominate everything. And that's what I told the team. I'm like, guys, you guys got to add as much complexity as possible so that we're just not going to dominate every single aspect of the game, which we're going to try anyways. And we probably will anyways, but at least it gives a lot of opportunities to other players. And, when we touch on mastery, I think that's going to be such a great mechanic to give players opportunities. We'll get into that in a minute. But all right, next is probably one of a lot of people's favorite topics. Let's roll the footage, Grill.
Yeah, I think it's one of people's favorite things in any kind of fantasy setting, and that is magic and spells.
This is a big one, guys. Spells. We talked about spells. One of the things that we have in our game that we like a lot is that you essentially have items you can equip. And we want everything to try to funnel into that system. Because again, once you learn that, which is drag sword over to the one slot, you now can pull that sword out. You can see it on your hip. A torch, put that in a slot. That's what you'll be wielding, and it can cast light. We think there's an opportunity to have spells function the same way, and we think it's pretty sweet. So imagine that spells you are finding are a focus or a disc with runes on it. And if you have the right mastery, you can wield that spell, and the Materium you have can funnel through it and fire that spell. What's cool about that is there's a little bit of a strategic choice about what spells you're going to have at the ready when you're walking into combat. So if you have 3 items you can equip 3 different spells. During combat, you can swap those out if you want, but the 3 that you'll have at the ready will be there, and you can cast them as much as you want, as long as you have the Materium to cast them. What's really sweet about that is you can see them. If these are ancient kind of focuses that you can acquire, you can actually see them on your hip. It would be there just like a sword would on a hilt. So if you're a very high power mage, you walk into the tavern, people can glance at you and kind of see some of the spells that you have at the ready. So it's a pretty incredible floss, if you have a super powerful spell. Kind of cool.
Well, it's the first time I've heard anybody use the word floss as a flex. One of the things I love about McCarthy's vision of Mirandus is he wants people to be recognizable legends in the game, and things like he just mentioned where you can see the type of spells you have equipped are a good little example of that. But yeah, there's so much to say here. I mean, first of all, nothing new, but I think it's worth reemphasizing that I think the fact that Materium is both mana or magic and a currency is one of the most brilliant Web3 economic mechanisms of all time. Like, so many people are going to be wanting to cast spells, and I can see people with a lot of money, just going on the market, buying a shitload of Materium just so they can go in the game and just be a baller spellcaster. I think that's going to happen. And again, as far as the economic health of Materium, it's going to be great, right? If people come in and just start throwing fireballs everywhere, that's great for the economy. So anyways, Alem, I know you're excited to cast magic. What's your thoughts?
Yeah, so I've played casters in pretty much every MMORPGs for decades, and I intend to play a caster in Mirandus as well. So spells for me is obviously something I'm clearly interested in. I very much like in PvE that they have the ability to show off your spells. It's a nice flex, especially if you have some particularly rare spells. That, of course, becomes a disadvantage in, say, the arena if you're in PvP, where people know what you're potentially going to be casting and they can preemptively counter that. So it'd be nice to potentially have an option to turn that off, at least in the, say the arena PvP setting. With regards to what he's saying and the way that Materium works with casting, there were a few things that we were potentially thinking. Was one, Materium just gets deducted. So you cast a small fireball, you lose 1 Materium. You cast, say, a meteor, you maybe cost 1,000 Materium, etc. We were also potentially thinking is that you spend a certain amount of Materium and you fill up a bar, kind of like a mana bar, and you just cast until that mana bar expires. But from what he's saying, it sounds like it's going to be directly deducted from your wallet. So the previous example of the 1 fireball costing 1 Materium, etc. I also like the fact that the ability of you carrying around your spells and showing them off is quite the flex. And also the ability to burn Materium to reckless abandon, metering the lowly rabbits and stuff as you walk by is something that I would probably do. I'm very fond of earning money, but when it comes to spell casting, my pockets become a little more loose. So as you mentioned, someone that's going to go baller and just burn through Materium, that would probably be more along my lines when it comes to spell casting.
Actually, I love hearing that. Grill, thoughts?
Everyone likes to show off at least a little bit, right? No, I like that it's going to be, I was thinking maybe the spells would be attached to, they said like discs or something. I can't remember if it was in this clip or another one where possibly discs. I was thinking maybe more attached to items or even just the ability to learn. I do kind of like the idea that you could equip them as well. Like I said, we all like to flex a little bit. That's part of the reason why we do this. And I like where they're going with how they're handling the spell casting in this game.
Yeah, on the flex side, something I've just pondered a lot is, if you create a world like Mirandus and you got enough players, suddenly it matters more. Like, the more players there are in there, the more flexing becomes the thing, right? And the more you're going to want to be special. It's just human nature, right? People want to be recognized as unique or special or powerful. And, we're going to see that play out in Mirandus, I think, in a really big way, especially as the game grows. And one of the most special ways to flex is going to be in the next video. So Grill, roll it.
Yep. Up next, one of the most important parts of the entire game, mastery.
Mastery. So mastery, guys, that we're kind of a skill-based mastery system. The more you swing a sword, the better you get at swords. The more you swing more you use a spear, the better you get at spears. The more you use fire magic, the better you get at your fire mastery goes up. So mastery really is the gate for a lot of things. The gate for equipping a complex item, a cool magical sword, is going to require you to have some mastery in swords. If it's a fire sword, maybe it might require, or some items might require multiple levels of mastery in order for you to be able to equip. So just kind of locking how mastery works, and, classes, I think, are in this too. Classes for us guys are major leaps forward. So in this game, you start and you're just a dude or a dudette, and you get a class. Like a class, you must have the prerequisite mastery in order to even equip that class. If you want to be called a swordsman of the dark, you will need to have sword mastery. You'll need to have dark magic mastery. You'll need to have bow mastery of a certain level. You'll need to have all of this stuff to allow you to equip that class. And what's cool about that is we are planning on classes being, a major leap forward in your powers and abilities. So some things are more incremental and some things are major moments. You're like, man, the second I was able to equip that class, I got a lot of passive buffs. I got these crazy new powers. That should be a big moment for you in the game. And also when players hover over you and they see your name, they now will see the class. It will show your name, plus you are a dark master of, whatever, which is kind of a cool flex. Mastery increases in combat, and I think kind of talk about this in a couple different sections, but we talked about combat contribution, guys. This is an incredibly difficult thing to always do. So for mastery to increase, you must engage in combat. You do not get mastery for engaging in combat and running away, engaging in combat and losing. It is actually calculated at the moment that you have killed the beast. Once you have killed the monster, killed the beast, that is the moment where we process, okay, here's how much mastery you've acquired. Congratulations. You might have gone up a tier in mastery or two. It is upon death. These are the little decisions that we make all the time, guys, and we made them in the room with the community there. They can tell you a little bit how those conversations go, but it's exactly kind of how you'd expect. We brainstorm stuff and say, hey, wouldn't it be cool if this wouldn't be too hard to develop? Let's try to do it this way. So we didn't want mastery to increase the entire time you're fighting because it's a heavy technical load. And also it's a little distracting. I'm fighting a creature and then this floats are going up over here saying I've increased in mastery. We wanted a crescendo moment. So we like the idea that you actually have to fell a beast to earn the mastery in whatever weapon you were using or spells you were firing, and then it goes up. Spells gain mastery even if you are not doing damage, but they also can do damage to a creature, and you will get mastery if that creature is felled. So it's kind of a double dip there. And we feel that that's important because mastery is costing Materium, or spells are costing Materium to cast. So whether or not you were to hit something with a fireball, you still have summoned it and gone through the exercise to create that fireball, and therefore mastery would be earned. If you damage that creature or kill it, then you get an additional plus up with mastery.
Make mastery matter. That was a headline in the heavy paper. Yeah, I think mastery is one of the most important mechanics in the entire game for a lot of reasons, especially economically. First of all, weapon gating. You're not going to be able to equip certain weapons, so that's going to be a huge motivator for people. But one thing he didn't talk about in the AMA, which we did talk about in Austin, is going to be, crafting gating. And I think, when we talk about giving maximum opportunities for players, let's say, you're an iron shaper and you're the only guy in Mirandus that can craft a certain weapon. You're going to be able to command a premium crafting fee. That's to me, that's really important on the economic design side. So I think you're going to see that on the crafting side, as well as obviously on the combat side, but just focusing on the crafting side for a second, I think the top exemplars that have the highest levels of mastery that can only be the only ones that can produce certain things, whether it's jewels or potions or weapons, are really going to command a hefty crafting fee premium. That's exciting. One thing that's worth talking about is you're going to be basically able to buy your way to magic mastery. which some people are not going to like, but I love it because, again, I think it's a great economic incentive to go and do what Alan wants to do, which is to blast rabbits with a sky of fireballs. And I think Magic Mastery is going to be extremely rare and powerful for that reason. I think very few players will have the Materium to basically just crank their Magic Mastery to the max. And yeah, there's so much to unpack here, but Ilum, go ahead.
First off, talking about classes. So given the fact that classes will require multiple sets of masteries, and they could be pretty high requirements, having a class itself, other than it making you much more powerful, will be quite a flex in itself. So I do like that about the classes. I'm curious to see what all the different class types are and what they entail. With regards to the way that they're calculating mastery, in general, I do like the fact that you have to defeat the enemy to acquire mastery. It's a little bit of a letdown potentially that someone casting spells, though, could literally be sitting in a citadel and just shooting fireballs at the ground and reach max mastery without actually engaging in combat whatsoever. Of course, if they were engaging in combat, the fact that they get a bonus after, felling the beasts or whatever, it would be much more efficient. But if you want to spend enough money, you could do it without really any combat engagement whatsoever. The bonus on death is interesting. Of course, you're not really going to get a bonus on death if you're, say, a bard or a healer, though. So for people like bards and healers, they will likely be the hardest to increase mastery on, simply because they'll never get those bonuses as they're not contributing to the damage to the mob. So if you ever see a bard or a healer with really high class and high mastery level, they're kind of like the upper echelon of spenders most likely in the game. And it would be nice to actually see one or multiple of them around in the world.
Grill?
Yeah, I agree. There's a lot to this. I didn't imagine them having mastery for the classes. I'm not sure why. It does make a lot of sense. And as Alan said, there'll be pretty big flexes, especially if you have something that requires very high mastery in one or multiple categories. As for the bards, they might be big spenders. Also, they could have utility outside of actual combat where they might be very busy. So they're potentially playing spells all day that are actually providing utility. I've said before, they could be like buffing people in crafting buildings or farms and stuff like that, increasing their speed, or maybe even buffing mastery of other people, like a temporary mastery buff. So there might be some other ways where they can level relatively quickly without spending a bunch of extra Materium, just kind of playing songs for themselves. But yeah, no, I think mastery, it's the leveling system of this game. As you know, in any other MMO, leveling is such an important part of the process. And it will continue to be here as well.
Yeah, one question I have, back in the day, some older AMAs, McCarthy wanted classes to be NFTs, which I think is a great thing. If classes are loot drops when you kill creatures, it creates another market, right? And again, I really want new players to have great economic opportunities. And I think the number one economic opportunity for a new player is going to be these random loot drops, whether it's a class or a map or things like that they can go and resell for maybe $100 or $500 or whatever it is. So hopefully they do that. They didn't talk about that at all. And I really hope that mastery is incredibly complex, which just sounds like it's going to be. And it sounds like we're going to have to make maybe some tough choices in terms of, are you going to be a sword master or an axe master or a fireball master or an ice magic master? And it's going to create, again, a lot more opportunity for different types of exemplars. And if combat is tuned in a way where certain creatures will take a lot of fire damage, that could really shape the group that you would bring. You'd want a lot of fireball masters or ice magic masters to go fight certain types of really tough creatures. So yeah, I think mastery is a big deal, and really excited. But Alan, what's your thoughts on crafting gating and its impact on the economy? Because again, if you're, let's say, the only guy that can craft a certain type of potion, I think that exemplar would be well rewarded.
Yeah, so when it comes to crafting gaming, I've had in a few MMORPGs where I was the only person able to do certain things, and that gives a oversized value to you. So, for example, let's say you have a pattern or formula or whatever to produce something that everybody wants. So something that's best in slot, or something that is such a big improvement to your character in some way that everybody wants it, and you're the only person who can cast that or make that. You can command an absolutely ridiculous amount from it, and that's in WoW how I made a substantial amount of my money. Was I was the only person who could make a base component to craft legendaries at one point, and in a period of say a few weeks, I made more gold than I did in the 17 years prior to that. So it's enormous if you're in that unique scenario. Essentially, you have the monopoly on something that everyone needs, kind of like the mom vision for food, but much more specific and not as in quotes required, but something that people really, really want. So yeah, no, I very much like that. It adds a lot of interesting economic effects. It also, if you happen to be someone who just happens to find this out in the wild, it's kind of hitting like the jackpot effect, and that can really interest people coming into the space, knowing that the potential for someone who's not spending quite as much as some others has the opportunity to really hit it big as well. So yeah, I very much like that.
Up next, the kind of an extension of the mastery clip here, and talk a little bit about armor.
You cannot equip it if you don't have the mastery to use it. We have made an exception for armors and rings. We talked about this at the offsite. We don't think you should be able to put Excalibur at your side unless you are powerful in sword mastery and light magic and whatever else, if there's some sort of incredible magical sword, you cannot just wear that around on your hip and wield it and poke at things like with a broomstick. You just don't get it and know how to use that thing. Therefore, you cannot equip it. So when you see someone walk in and they have a weapon on their character, you can be like, dang, that guy's pretty powerful. But we thought about that for armors and rings. Like armors and rings just feel a bit weird to have mastery attached to. How do I get leather armor mastery? Oh, we have to wear leather armor, and then you get hit with a sword. You get hit enough while wearing it that your mastery goes up. Like, oh, that kind of sucks. So we kind of liked the idea that we just remove that rule for armors and rings. And again, guys, from a game design standpoint, I am always a proponent of removing rules. The less rules, the better. Every time we put a law or a rule into place, it's something you don't get to do. So I like starting with a game that has as few rules as possible, seeing what you guys do, because that allows you more freedom. And it works for a lot of reasons. Makes the game more fun. So yeah, let's walk through what that looks like. I'm a very powerful, high-level guy. My buddy comes in, he's very low level and stinks. Yeah, I can, if I want to give Frodo the Mithril, we call it, if I want to give something very fancy to help buff my friend's defense early on, we think you should be allowed to do that. So this is going to be a game where you can help lower level players by getting them defensive things like armors and rings. And that'll just kind of help get them through the tough times while they're going out there and swinging their little short sword until they can acquire better mastery.
Armor and jewelry just got a huge buff. I mean, it's got to be a good thing, I think, for jewelry crafting, iron shapers, creating armor shops. That's going to be a big deal, because again, I think you'll see a lot of players, new players coming in who have money, just go and max out maybe their armor or max out their jewelry, knowing that they can essentially buy very, very high level gear. Going to be good for those economic loops. Grill, opinions?
They're essentially allowing the game to have low-level twinks, which I'm not against really at all. In fact, some of the most fun I've ever had playing MMOs, especially WoW, was on a low-level character in Battlegrounds or PvP in that game. That was completely twinked out with like the best gear you could possibly get at that level. I think it will allow you to, if you have multiple exemplars, I think it will allow you to very safely level some of those those low-level characters early on, where you don't really have to worry about danger too much, unless you're being incredibly stupid. So yeah, I think I'm in favor of it.
Ilum?
So, a few things I have to say about this. So, first off, I haven't played multiple games that have had mastery or similar systems to mastery that have increased with getting hit. I like the fact that they're not going that route. It usually leads to kind of bad gameplay where you aggro lots of really low-level mobs and just go AFK while they're hitting on you, or attack some larger mob that takes bigger amounts of damage to level up your mastery armor or whatever, and it just leads to really bad gameplay. So yeah, like I said, I'm happy that they're not going that route. The fact that you can essentially twink out a lower level character or a weaker character from a mastery perspective, that also will allow things such as boosting to be much more prevalent and easier to do. So if you can bring in some low level characters with really high amounts of armor into higher level areas, they will be able to survive those areas more than they would otherwise. So this can, to some extent, allow for things like power living and such, which tends to be a pretty toxic gameplay experience, but is incredibly good from an economic perspective. So I'm a little on the edge on there, but at the same time, I see there's a lot of earning potential related to those kind of activities. So yeah, I'm overall okay with that. The armor and jewelry, I agree with you, Virtual. That does increase value for armor and jewelry. It increases the audience potential that it can reach, and makes crafting these higher tier armors that typically would only be seen by a relatively small number of people now much more valuable to literally everybody out there. So I like what I'm seeing in the direction they're going with this.
One more thing, I think it also adds the opportunity to bring maybe some non-combative exemplar types out into the field. Like, let's say you go into an area and there's some high-level trees, you need a green cloak. They're normally wearing like their...
You need a torchbearer.
Yeah, torch. They could be the torchbearer and tree harvester, but it might be very dangerous to them. Well, you can stack them up with some super high-level armor where maybe the risk factor is not quite as high for them.
Yeah, that's a good point, girl. I like that.
For sure. I'm pro anything that helps the economy. I mean, I think that's where I'm always at. And I hope they let us put rings in our toes and other body parts. All right, next clip. This is a hot topic, I think. I think a lot of people have opinions on this one.
Up next clip here is about durability.
Durability. We don't hate the idea, and I'm saying we, when I say we, guys, it's like the development team and everyone who's at the offsite. No one really hated the idea of items getting damaged out there, but I think we all agreed, like I've talked about before, that it just sucks if it's breaking all the time, and that, it needs to be more of a, I'm going to say, Diablo rhythm of I use this thing all the freaking time, and at some point maybe it breaks and I have to take it back to somewhere. I go tink, 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 and then it's healed. So we're not going to be implementing that right away, but it was just kind of a communal agreement that it sucks when it's breaking all the time. It sucks if it breaks 20%. Oh, your blade is now 20% less sharp, and now I'm doing 20% less damage, and just a little too much on the brain. So, I think our kind of communal agreement was, let's not have it, but if we do put it in, let's have it be, it works most all the time. There's a possibility of it breaking. At that point, it kind of, is barely functional, but kind of functions, and you can fix it really quickly at a local forge or leatherworker or whatever that might be.
Yeah, my 2 cents on that is, I think one, if you only have to repair, let's say, weapons and armor once a week, or if you're grinding 14 hours a day like Ilum and Grill are good, maybe twice a week or something, I don't think it's a burden. I think it's a great thing for the economy. I think what no one wants is like you have to go repair every day, every 4 hours, go back and repair. I think that would be burdensome. And it'd be cool if like the highest level weapons just never break. And maybe that's going to be a thing on the tuning side. But Grill, what's your opinion? How would you, if you were part of the devs, how would you tune, repair, and weaponry around this entire conversation?
I've been on kind of both sides. Like he mentioned Diablo, where like the repairs are very rare, or something like WoW, where sometimes you might have to repair. every few hours. It's really just kind of a numbers game. Like, you know, if the repairs are instant, you could just make it part of your in-town loop of getting buffs, repairing your gear, storing things, selling things off. I don't think that it's really just a matter of balancing. Like, if it's quick, then it doesn't really matter how often you're doing it, and then how much Materium it costs is really it's all about the numbers more than anything else. You know, is it very cheap and you do it more often, or is it more expensive and you do it rarely? You know, and then it's just a matter of time. If repairing is something that takes a long time, then yeah, I think it would be pretty annoying if you had to do it multiple times a day. But if it's quick, if it's simply just click on a forge, wait 5 seconds, and your gear is repaired, then doing it often, and to me, is not such a big deal.
Ilum, how would you tune this?
Yeah, so I completely disagree that repairing frequently is burdensome at all. In WoW, I repair like every hour on average, and I don't even notice it. As Grilla says, just routine when you go in to sell items, turn in quests, etc. It literally takes seconds, and I don't even acknowledge it for the most part. The only time it really becomes burdensome is if you're in a far-off dungeon and you have no way to repair easily, and then it kind of upsets the flow of the game. But that's typically only happens if you've been there for a very long time or you're wiping very regularly, which causes increased durability loss. The only time that I see it potentially being burdensome if it's really, really expensive, or if it's, as Grill was mentioning, if it's time consuming. So I very much like the instant repair. You pay a bit of Materium or resources or whatever, and boom, you're repaired. The other thing is, when they're talking about, 20% less durability, it's weaker, I happy they're not going that route. They do similar things with food in Valheim, where if you consume food, when you first consume it, it gives you like this huge buff. And then very quickly over time, that buff degrades. It's not a particularly good feeling. And even if you have, say, 5 or 10 minutes left on that food buff, you typically want to use another one because it's not really providing you with much benefit. Going out in the wild and having your weapons dull or whatever, sure, you can have, sharpening stones or whatever to enhance that, but having your damage slowly decline, it just doesn't feel good. Like, usually you want to see progression when you're doing things. Seeing your progression actually decline is not a good feedback loop. Then there's the thing with regards to durability versus completely breaking. So say in Breath of the Wild of Zelda, an item can, when its durability runs out, it just breaks completely. There's no repairing. So, will they have it to the point where the durability runs out and you simply unequip the weapon or can't equip it? Will it be that you can repair it all the way to max, or will they have some combination where if something breaks, it actually completely breaks versus having a probability where you can actually repair it? So that adds a little more depth to the system. I like the not completely breaking and being able to repair at any point, and the not declining in efficacy until the durability is 0. I like the system, though. It's great for the economy, and they definitely should have durability in some form or another.
Yeah, after hearing you guys, I mean, if going into town and repairing things is part of your cycle, that's a good thing. It's a good thing for the economy, right? Go get a hot meal, get your stuff repaired, and grab some potions and hit the road, right?
More sinks, the better. That's fine. That's what it comes down to. The game needs as many sinks as possible.
Yeah, and if low-level weapons disintegrate once in a while, it's a good thing for the economy as well, right? There's a lot of concerns around low-level hyperinflation of items. So
you could counter that a bit by using those to either be smelted down or be used as part of bigger crap. I mean, there's ways of getting rid of those without them disappearing. Them disappearing at random would be kind of fun, though. Go to swing a sword and poof, it turns into dust.
Well, that'd be kind of like the torch. If it goes the way we think, right, it'll just turn into dust, or maybe it just becomes a normal club. Who knows? But yeah, the other thing is you could have potentially some items break and some not. Like some higher class items, they run out of durability and you can repair them, but the low level wooden sword, you can never repair that. Once that's gone, it's just gone. So that would, as you mentioned, help with hyperinflation of the lower items. Nobody really worries about hyperinflation of the really powerful items, so I don't see that being needed on, say, Excalibur, but you could probably want that on, say, a basic rusty short sword or whatever of that nature.
all right, next, this from a pure art and conceptual perspective, this is one of my favorite things. So let's roll the footage.
Yeah, no, this is really cool. Up next, Purgatory.
So when you die, guys, you go to Purgatory. You don't just get a UI that says respawn at your cemetery, you go to Purgatory. And this does a lot of really interesting things. So show that image actually, Paul. This was one of the previs images we made of Purgatory. You guys saw some other concepts. We're not sure exactly what we're going to do yet, but this is a lot of fun. When you die, guys, you go to this place and you're standing there because you died and you have not chosen to walk through the gates yet and maybe spend Materium or not to come back without penalty, but you're here in this place. And your friends, as you're in the dungeon, you're hoping they don't appear and, oh crap, you're here too, crap, oh crap. Your friends just start appearing in Purgatory because the battle went horribly wrong. And you can kind of hang out here and commiserate and talk and laugh a bit. You know, there's also kind of a nice way to say, hey man, great job back there. Sorry you died. You can actually still trade in Purgatory as well. You could give someone Materium and say, hey man, why don't you go ahead and come back without penalty? Here's some Materium. You could trade loot, but it's just a really funny place to be hanging out and talking smack about who died and who didn't. I told you not to go in there, and it's been kind of fun. So this is the place you will appear, and you'll be able to approach the gates or the cemetery that you have bound yourself to, and have a little pause or a break before you make that commitment to come back. You know, as far as cemetery cost goes, something we talked about is we have to set a base cost for some actions in the game, and a cemetery is one of them. So we're going to, you know, assign a kingdom tax, if you will, to ever come back, and it escalates based on your level of mastery. If you're an incredibly well-mastered person, it costs more to respawn without penalty. But we have to set what that base price is, and then cemetery owners can add in what they want to on top of it. And that's kind of their free market, but everyone's going to share in the same base cost. So that's to avoid things like, I have a cemetery, I charge nothing, and all my friends bind to it, and then everyone just comes back for free. So there's things in the game that we have to tune for the Materium economy inside the game to ensure there's sinks, and then you guys get to add a slice on top.
You blew my plan, McCarthy. That was part of my plan. Yeah, I mean, first of all, it looks really cool. I mean, I'm curious what you guys think. What percentage of players, I guess let me ask this question two ways, or an A-B question. What percentage of players do you think are going to pay the res fee early on? And then what percentage of players are going to pay it once they're at a high level of mastery? Grill, what's your opinion?
I think it really comes down to is like, how much material would it take me to, how much would I have to use to get back to my previous point? You know, would it be cheaper to just pay it at the cemetery, or would I need to? Would it cost me less to just gain it back by grinding it out? Plus, you'd also be earning by grinding it out too. Also, I think at a high level, if those levels take days, weeks, months to get at the very top tier levels, you might. And it really comes down to the math. It might be worth it to pay it at the graveyard, even if it's expensive. Early on, I don't see people paying to keep their mastery, because generally the way these games are balanced, things early on are fast. You might get multiple mastery levels a day compared to later on where they can take a long time.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are going to take some piss breaks early on, but Eldon, what's your opinion?
So a lot of things to mention here. So first off, looking at that image of the kind of purgatory gate, there was a timer above it, 29:59, which I'm assuming is a countdown timer from 30 minutes, which is suggestive, at least at the present, that the base time to just sit in purgatory would be 30 minutes. Now, I'm not sure if you have to wait that entire duration, whether you want to pay the Materium fee or not, or whether paying the Materium fee just simply removes any Materium loss. It'll be interesting to see. Now, something that most people probably wouldn't have thought of, but it's crossed my mind, and that's with the whole thing about the Dark Sun in the background. And I do wonder if the Dark Sun elf could potentially get some benefit from actually going into purgatory, like either a reduced fee or potentially some kind of, in quotes, buff from actually coming out of purgatory, maybe less mastery loss or something along those lines. Purgatory also, the kind of just sitting around with all these people in Purgatory, you're kind of like in detention, right? The kind of the losers club of the game, and I think that will be kind of actually a little fun in itself. With regards to the kingdom taxes, and I'm not sure, maybe you know more on this, Virtual, but do the kingdom taxes go to, say, the Citadel owner, or is it burned, or is it go into a reward pool, or what actually happens with these, in quotes, kingdom taxes that they're suggesting? Do you know that?
Yeah, so we talked about that. I mean, I don't think they've made any final decisions. My suggestion was burn all of the Materium spent, so that'll extend the lifespan of the emissions.
Okay.
We should probably do a whole video on the heavy paper. We can talk about all that stuff. But that, again, McCarthy hasn't made a final decision on that, but I think that's where he's leaning. Just burn it.
Okay, well, that's good. With regards, you were asking a question of what percentage of people are going to do what. I think early on, everyone will want to get out of Purgatory as quickly as possible, as the cost is scaled based on your mastery. Later on, it simply becomes a thing of patience versus the time value of money. So if you can earn more money by being out there than paying the fee, most people will just stay in there. The other thing is, if you're losing mastery at higher levels, mastery loss can be substantial. Now, I played one game way back in the day that had mastery or experience loss, and a single death due to a disconnect could literally cost you weeks worth of experience, which was really painful back in the dial-up days. And that was actually the most common cause of death back then, was disconnection or server issues or whatever. So yeah, no, I feel the pain in that regard, and it's not a particularly good feeling. Now, of course, could you have deaths due to disconnects and the like in this game? Sure. I know in the last playtest I died more because the servers went offline on the hour than deaths from mobs even when actually playing and such. So will people do that? Yeah, you'll see people burning the Materium. Any kind of burn of Materium I'm for. I would like to see the cemetery owners get more of that, but I understand the value of sinks and stuff. So we'll have to see how this all plays out. But yeah, I agree with early on more people spending, later on less people spending, but spending larger amounts. So over time, I don't see your cemetery spending fees to be that much difference, other than I expect as you get more in depth that you simply die less and it kind of averages out in your favor in that way.
Yeah, I think the more mastery matters, I mean, the more higher level players just going to pay it. I mean, if you lose a week's worth of mastery and suddenly you can't equip your Excalibur anymore, you got to pay that fee. Of course you are. Yeah, I suspect that higher level players are just going to pay it. And I think, to me, this whole mechanic is one of the most exciting parts of Mirandus. It's a high risk, high reward game where death matters. Death has penalties. So love it. All right, next clip. Grill, roll it.
Next clip, they talk a bit about deeds and buildings.
Buildings, we've talked about this, but I'll rip through these guys. Deeds all have a repelling factor. So by placing a deed down, monsters and enemies don't like coming near it. I've talked about this forever, but it is true. We actually have that repelling force. I don't know if it'll be in the next tech test or not, but monsters just generally don't want to come to town. Oh, it smells like humans. They don't like all the lights and lanterns. If you have a crappy deed, or a tiny deed anyway, that will be not very much a repelling force at all. As you work your way up and start getting into the towns, monsters will hate to come near them, and you'll generally be safe there. You can pull a monster back with you. It will repel things, but if they're really pissed off, you can probably bring something into town. And then citadels are the ultimate safe places. They will be their own zones. If you're a building owner, you have to return to your building to collect the income from that building. We don't want you to, we need you in the game for compliance reasons and just to make the game more fun. Logging in, coming in, walking around the town, checking in on your building. It just makes for a better experience. So if your building is done well, you don't need to be there when people are making purchases, but you do need to log in, walk to your building, and perform some actions to collect the income that your building acquired. Deed owners, we will make sure that deed owners have the ability to dictate which buildings can be placed. So you will be able to look at your town layout and say, no, I don't want 50 cemeteries here. This is available for a cemetery only. These 3 will be X. You guys need to have that level of control. We understand that. We'll make sure that gets in. We promised you if you place a deed, you get a buff. That is true, but the current thinking is that you do need to place the deed. So are you a prince because you just own the deed? Ideally, you're a prince because you are managing a town of the prince and managing a town. And oh my God, there he goes. There's the prince. So, ultimately that's what we want to get to, guys. Crafting buildings, just so you guys know, you're going to have tons of recipes when you start. There might be recipes you can find in the world that are cool and rare, but everyone's going to have a lot of the base stuff just built into their building. We've talked about maybe the larger the building, the more recipes you have access to. It does make sense to us that a Grand Forge, Majestic Forge has hotter fires and can maybe craft certain things that you shouldn't be able to in a tinkerer's tent.
There's a lot there. First of all, as a guy who owns over 20 deeds, walking around and collecting, I guess it's a high class problem, but yeah, interesting. Not sure how I feel about that. Good to see them thinking about, which is something we've kind of put them on blast about before, giving unique utility to higher level buildings. I mean, I think they need to do that. I think otherwise, why even own Grands or Majestics, even if you can't do unique things there? I think it'll be really good for the owners of those buildings. But yeah, Ilham, thoughts, reactions to all of that.
So I have a lot to say about all this stuff. So first off, with regards to the deeds, in early videos, say from a couple of years ago, in the kind of the general knowledge of the prevailing years, most of the repelling was due to walls. Now, he's not mentioning anything to walls, and he's mentioning the lights and stuff kind of repelling mobs. So does that mean that walls are no longer relevant, and thus there would be really no incentive to potentially upgrade walls if upgrading walls is even a possibility at this point? So that's something to consider. He's also mentioned the Citadel being the ultimate safe zone. That wasn't particularly true in the last playtest. If you ran out of stamina and you started taking ticking damage, I've seen a lot of people actually die inside the Citadels. So that's kind of a unique case, but still not truly the ultimate safe zone as they're mentioning. The fact that you have to go to various buildings and stuff to collect forces increased daily active users as opposed to someone who simply sits on their assets and does nothing. It also increases value to people that are really active. So you see this in Echoes of Empire, but to a really annoying extent, mostly based on the way the timers are working, that you have to renew your planets. And if you don't renew your planets, they become less efficient. So you collect less dust from them and resources and the like. To the point that if you go long enough, they simply cease to function. So that forces people to actually play the game. Now, in Echoes of Empire, people probably are not going to play the game because there's no actual earnings involved with it. In quotes, no actual earnings, as in the earnings are so low that it's not worth doing. With regards to what you're saying, virtual with having a lot of different deeds, one way to make that a little more efficient would be having potentially one exemplar at each of your deeds. So that would prevent you from having to worry about travel time to go between the various deeds, and just have that one exemplar essentially as the, in quotes, tax collector of that deed to make sure everything's functioning in a particular location or that anything of that nature. With regards to the buffs, I don't like where they're going with this. I very much like that people will have buffs, but it doesn't feel good. So let's say you have a Town of the Prince and you're not able to place that Town of the Prince because there's no available spots. So not alone are you not getting to place your town, which feels bad, but you're also losing out on the potential of this buff that someone is placing the town is getting. So you're getting kind of doubly bent over here. I think a better system would everybody gets a buff, and the person who's not actually getting to place the town potentially gets an even larger buff to somewhat, at least minimally compensate for the fact that they're not getting the huge utility of someone that is placing the buff. And he's saying, you're not really a prince if you're not actively managing a town. Well, just because you're not actively managing your kingdom doesn't really mean you're not a prince. Like, let's say, I'm not sure anyone's a Dragon Ball fan, but Vegeta, the Prince of all Saiyans, even after his planet's destroyed, he's still the Prince of Saiyans. So he still has that kind of royalty title and things related to it. And I don't really see why Mirandus would be any different from that perspective. But yeah, lots of interesting things here. I'm interested in what your thoughts are there as well, Gro.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what they're doing makes sense. I agree with you that you should have to go collect from your deeds, from your buildings. And, having exemplars in place to do that is definitely the right way to go. As for the repelling factor, I think that was either the first or second video. They had like the little town with the monster running at it, and then sort of like the big walls of the monsters like running away. Kind of a blast from the past from the very, very early Mirandus videos. With the buildings having the recipes, that's something we've talked about. In videos privately, as you said, Virgil, this wouldn't make sense otherwise. I mean, why? Not giving those bigger buildings extra utilities kind of makes them pretty, I don't want to call them useless. I don't want to call them like a large armory, or a large weapon shop. But yeah, it devalues them quite a bit. So yeah, I'm happy with most of what they said, and I do agree with you, Alan, as well, that like it's bad enough you don't place your town because the game hasn't expanded to the point where there's not space for it, but just to get shafted on the buff, which should be one of the best parts about owning. I mean, owning a town in itself is amazing, but I have a feeling those buffs are going to be quite powerful, and to not have access to that, along with not being able to place your town, is going to feel really bad for some of the people who are the biggest supporters of this game.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but the original thinking around the debuffs is it would buff you in that zone. Ilum, is that correct?
So originally when they first mentioned the buffs, they just said you were going to get a buff. Later on, probably like a year later, when people were asking McCarthy specifically about the buffs, he said his thought was that you would get that buff related to that zone. So let's say you had a Town of the Prince in one zone, you would have the Prince buff within that zone. You had, say, a Town of the Duke in another zone. Maybe you get the Town of the Duke buff in that zone or whatever. But yeah, it was planned to be just zone specific.
It's interesting because kind of playing on what we said before is, if you don't get to place your town, you're still the prince. If you're not in your zone, you're still the prince, whether you're in your zone or not.
True.
Yeah, I guess you could, in that case, now that you mention that, girl, that's a good thing to come up with. You could potentially make it so even if you don't place your town, you could, like, in quotes, shadow place your town, where you're like, this is where I would place my town if I could, and you could assign yourself a buff for that zone for, say, the remainder of that particular season or whatever, as a counter to get around that.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting workaround for sure. You put a little flag down and said, my home should be here. You get a little pennant in the ground, that's it.
All right. Next clip, and yeah, I'll save my comments for afterwards. Roll it, Drill. It's a good one.
Yeah, next clip is about damage types.
Damage types and interactions will resolve independently. I'm just ripping on these game feature nerd notes, guys. So this is, bear with me, but damage types are a thing. We have to engineer it a certain way. There's a lot of communication that happens around it, and it affects everything. How does armor work? So a fire sword is an example here where the damage type that it applies two types of damage. It applies slashing damage and also molten damage or fire damage, if you will. So you can imagine that you're attacking a fire golem or a lava monster of some kind. Your slashing damage might apply, but your fire damage might be 0 against him because he's made of fire and doesn't care. So there's multiple different types of damage that a weapon can apply, and there's also many types of defenses that creatures and your armors can employ as well that will each work against those separate damage types.
Yeah, so on the combat side, I think this is a critical system. One of the things we talked about at the offsite was you're creating mechanics where you can't just throw 50 or 100 exemplars at a problem. And I think one of the ways to do that is having creatures with different types of sensitivities to different types of damage. And then if you take it even further and have, a bunch of different unique hit boxes on a creature, maybe if you do fire damage under its belly, that's its sensitive spot. It creates a lot more strategic decisions when it comes to combat. So hopefully they'll, and again, I'm not expecting that day one, but hopefully with time, they'll really tune the creatures in a way where there's a lot of unique damage type and hitbox opportunities, which will really create a lot of just strategic decisions when it comes to combat. So anyways, what's my thoughts on that? Grill, how do you see this playing out?
Yeah, I think it's going to make combat more interesting than ever. Otherwise, you're often just doing the same action repeatedly, and there's not much thought behind it. It could feel like that in some hack and slash games. You swing your sword and things. I mean, it kind of felt like that in the last playtest, right? You have 1 or 2 damage options, and one was just pretty much better for the most part, and you just did that one action over and over and over again. This will actually make you have to think a little bit and strategize a bit about what you're fighting, how you're fighting it, positioning on the mob itself potentially, looking for critical spots such as that. So yeah, I'm all for anything that kind of enhances the flavor of combat on the whole.
Ilum?
So this leads to a lot of potential combat changes. So let's say a mob is vulnerable to, say, slashing, and they suddenly go into some like defensive stance. Now that they're in this defensive stance, you can't slash them, and now their main vulnerability would be, say, a spell or blunt damage. So not just having various vulnerabilities and damage types, but having that change during the encounter based on what the mobs are doing could add a lot of depth to it.
Love that.
Also, having various different damage types can lead to different kind of status things. So let's say you're using a sword that casts frost. Well, you could potentially slow them or freeze them, and fire, you can light them on fire, etc. And then that also leads to further depth where you can have various gear that can buff certain damage types as well. Like you have earrings, Vox earrings of enhanced piercing damage or whatever. So a lot of gameplay depth can be added to vulnerability types. It also makes it much more interesting to try to learn mobs' vulnerabilities and when to use them and what sorts of spells and or weapons to use against various mobs at various times. It also makes it so you may want to have multiple different types of weapons, which means there's more economic effect into the ecosystem because you're having to acquire more materials and interact with more shops and stuff to acquire these additional gear pieces and the like. So yeah, no, I very much like where they're going with this.
Yeah, having creatures that are completely resistant to certain types of damage would be cool. And yeah, again, the more complexity, the better.
You got mobs that are kind of like become immune to certain things as you use them, and you have to keep switching as well. Like kind of the Borg from Star Trek. They have to keep changing the frequency of the lasers. Yeah, exactly. Adaptive mobs. Like unsurprisingly, as you mentioned with the economy, it opens up like a lot more economic opportunities, and it will also increase the number of chase items or weapons. Usually that top tier stuff. It won't be just one sword that's like 50 damage or whatever. That's the top one. That's what everyone's going for. Now there'll be lots of different options for these kind of ultimate endgame weapons and armors and such.
So a suggestion that I gave McCarthy, which he gave me that pondering look, didn't really say anything, but you could tell he was processing it, was what if boss level creatures, not one of ones, but maybe they respawn once in a while, what if they get tougher? Their stats get tough, higher and higher every time someone kills them. I mean, that's kind of what they did in the last playtest with Mother, right? They were just basically tuning it. But they could almost do that on an automated level where every time that boss dies, their stats go up 5 or 10%, which would make it, incrementally more challenging every single time it dies. What's your thoughts on that, Ilum?
So that's an interesting concept, and I agree. That's exactly what they were doing with Mother. The problem is that makes it potentially unattainable for people who are coming early. So as an example, so the first raid to beat them, sure, by the time they go to fight that same boss the next time, the raid's going to be a little stronger and they can probably overcome that 5 or 10%. But for a raid that's never been involved in that encounter, if the goalpost keeps moving away from them, it's possible they never hope to achieve. And that kind of loses out on that feeling of accomplishment and kind of the main thing that people are looking for in defeating these bosses. If you keep moving the goalposts, then people just give up. So I'm a little bit against that. Maybe if the contents were like instants, they could say that this group is locked to this particular mob and each time it increases. But in the open world, having a mob that constantly gets stronger over time, I don't think would really work per se.
Yeah, traditionally, when raid content or boss content is released in MMOs, it's the hardest at the beginning, and after it's been defeated, they start to nerf the content to make it accessible by the greater player base. I think buffing it is going to make it so that one group will be the only group that kills it, because it's usually the group that kills it first usually represents the best players from a gear and skill perspective. And I think you just like Adam said, you wind up buffing out most of, or if not all, the player base besides that one group.
Before we get into the spiciest content of the AMA by far, probably the spiciest topic ever in the history of Mirandus, there's a couple of things that you didn't clip, Grill, I just wanted to comment on. One was the apes. They look incredibly deadly. I mean, when you were throwing boulders, I mean, I'm assuming a boulder attack is going to be really bad news. Any reactions on the apes and the boulders?
I'm gonna get a big giant baseball mitt, catch those things, throw them back. Yeah, no, they look scary. They look dangerous. It's kind of a continuation. I didn't clip it because we kind of discussed that in the last AMA where they showed the new models. But yeah, they're looking quite deadly out there.
Ilum, do you want to fight the apes?
Yeah, so one thing that he was mentioning in the actual AMA was these larger mobs wouldn't be able to traverse the same areas. And say a big ogre is walking up to and you can't get around the tree, so he just like rips the tree out of the ground and like throws it at you or swings it at you. I think that sort of thing would be quite interesting to see. You know, a little halfling kind of skirting around through the bushes and they can't be seen, and the big ogre just kind of lifts up the entire ground and throws them, squishes them with the ground or something. Yeah, no, it's I like it. And I suspect a boulder being thrown at you and getting crushed with a boulder is probably not the most enjoyable experience, and probably would be visiting that purgatory not long after.
Another topic which we didn't clip was the spherical buildings. I'm guessing those are temples. What's your guess, guys?
It seemed like it might be like kind of designed for like a zone, right? Well, not the one building in specific. Like that could be, because they started bleeping things out. That's one of the reasons why I didn't include some of those clips. There's like so many bleeps I can. I feel like buildings in certain kingdoms or zones might have certain looks by default, and that's how it's a variety instead of everything looking the same. That's kind of what I got from that, but I could be wrong.
The fact that those are not within actual deeds, like temples, say, temple, large temple, grand temple, majestic temple, those should be locked into deeds. So there should be other buildings and stuff around them if they're temples from the type that we know, that buffs and the like. Could there be other kinds of temples out in the wild that are related to, I don't know, acquiring some NFTs or new spells or some other kind of gameplay element? There certainly could be. I agree they kind of look like some sort of temple, but yeah, honestly, I'm not really sure exactly what they are. And of course, it's all bleeped out and stuff in the AMA, so it's really hard to tell for sure.
Last note I had on things we didn't clip was the runes. Obviously, we've heard about the goblin language, but it looks like there's going to be a secret written language which would reveal certain clues. So that'll be fun and interesting to try to decipher. What's your thoughts on that, guys? Grill?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of adds to the kind of puzzle mystery, and like this world is just for you to explore and figure things out. That's, I think, it's going to be part of it.
Ilum?
So interestingly enough, the symbols, now you can't see them all that well because they're kind of blurred out, but from what you can see of them, the symbols look very similar to the symbols that we found in playtest number 2. And in playtest number 2, there were a bunch of words and there were also a bunch of symbols around a zone, and you had to use those words and symbols to combine to make a seed phrase a 12-word seed phrase that had 1 million Materium in the wallet. And those symbols look very eerily similar to the symbols that we're seeing. So I do wonder if that was kind of like an early preview into this written language within the world of Mirandus, and whether they'll continue on with that, or if that's simply a red herring at this point.
One thing that was talked about in relation to seasons is potentially every season would have like new puzzles. So I think one of the things they want to do is to try to keep refreshing zones in a way that's interesting. And obviously, if there's new puzzles, that'll be a lot of fun for players to try to decipher. So, I mean, I'm personally always been a sucker and a super fan of puzzles and games. And the fact that if you maybe crack a puzzle, you can get a 1 million Materium or whatever it is, just definitely adds to the excitement. Yeah, make puzzles great. All right, here we go. The spiciest topic in the history of Mirandus, in my opinion. Grill, let's roll it.
Next clip is about loot and looting, and this is just a small part of a large piece of this AMA, but I didn't want to run a 20-minute clip, so here is one part that I thought was pretty interesting.
To loot. What would it actually look like if we killed something and we had to walk up and loot it? And what we like is, here's what we want to try. And again, guys, these are things that we think are cool and we want to try it. Load up that first image, Paul. So, walk through this, guys. Oh, we killed a goblin and we're walking up. What we really want to avoid is, yeah, we've contributed, 3 or 4 of us contributed. You don't want someone to run over to it, take all. So go to the next one. So we walk over to this creature and there they are. There's 6 items on this creature. For you to tap on something and collect, just a little spinny wheel comes up that everyone can see. So it pays to go over there and see what the guy has on it. You tap on what it is you want to collect, and you get just a little delay before it actually makes it over to your inventory. Simultaneously, in real time, you can see what everyone else is picking. So imagine you're walking over to a creature and you're going through its pockets. You could grab something out of this pouch, but you cannot walk up and take all unless you were the only combat contributor. There's other edge cases too, where we're going to have a button for you to say, oh, I don't care. You can just give it up and then anyone else can loot it. So if someone doesn't care about the loot, they can just abandon creature. But you can walk up, and if there's a boss monster, there's 10 cool items, everyone's in there tapping on it, and you can see which ones they're picking, and you're picking one too. So you are still incentivized to be nearer the creature. And again, we walked through all these scenarios. Like, well, gosh, I'm the guy up front. I'm going to be able to click on him faster than you are. Well, yeah, but there'll be a couple second delay that if you're a ranged person, you can make it up there. And if you're the person in harm's way who's getting hacked by this thing, shouldn't you get to at least bring the loot screen up a couple seconds before the guy who was shooting arrows safely 30 yards away? Maybe. So we're going to try to implement this kind of straightforward, what it would be like to loot system, and start with that first.
Well, easily, again, the most contentious topic ever. We can see that in the Gala Discord of Mirandus. A lot of people are upset. Some people are excited. I think it's worth noting there's no perfect loot system. I mean, we've talked about this for hours for the last year plus. Let's talk about the pros of it. I mean, first of all, it gamifies it a little bit, which is cool. It will reward players that know what's the most valuable, which McCarthy did mention that as well. So meaning that if you know that that certain herb is actually more valuable than the Materium, maybe you grab the herb. And on that note, I think it will give opportunities for players to grab what's valuable to them. So if I have a potion shop, maybe that herb is more valuable to me than whatever, 10 Materium. So there's going to be that side of it, and just a bunch of other notes here. So one is going to be a combat contribution, and I did talk to the team. So here's a little bit of a potential alpha on what's the minimum percentage of combat contribution, and they haven't obviously finalized this, but they were thinking either 5 or 10%. meaning that if you're below that, you're not going to have the opportunity to get access to the loot table. It will be again first come, first serve. Each loot grab has a 5-second timer, which means let's say there's 8 drops and 7 players, then the first player would get a chance to get the second drop. There's a lot there. I'm going to save a whole bunch of other thoughts for after you guys react, but Grill, let's start with you.
From the entire clip, there's a lot to unpack. I'm not crazy about the whole first come, first serve. I think it opens up a little bit of opportunity for somebody who might be greedy to run away with something maybe they didn't earn or deserve, or maybe they just kind of abuse the system. It only takes one very special NFT to be kind of ninja and then sold without anyone else getting a piece for it to become a big problem for a lot of people. I personally like. Let me go back. I've run a lot of raids and I've run a lot of loot systems over the years. I've done free for all. I've done personal loot. I've done DKP, GDKP, master looting. I mean, pretty much every system that's out there now. Two that I really kind of like the most has been personal loot, where everyone gets a crack at the mob, and whatever drops when you click on it drops for you and no one else. And that's what you get. It's kind of just like there's a loot table, it rolls, you get what you get, and that's it. That system winds up being pretty fair, drama free. Doesn't always necessarily put the best loot in the best people's hands, but it's like you said, no system is perfect. The other system is a mass looting system, is where one person gets all the loot and then is distributed post-raid or at the end of a raid based on some other loot rules and things you might have in place. I tend to like those two systems. It's hard to do. This system could potentially be a mass loot system, but with the ability to only loot one item at a time, it kind of takes that away. I do like what you said about the gamification of it and the knowledge base. It gives it rewards players for knowing kind of what's what with the economy and items and stuff like that. It rewards your knowledge base, which I do like. But yeah. I'll stop there because there's other things about the one part of this discussion they had in the AMA to talk about. So we'll open up for Alan to discuss his thoughts on this as well.
Yeah, so I have a ton of things to say. I'm sure we'll have lots of additional follow-ups and back and forth here as well, so I won't go into all the stuff. But right off the bat, if they do something like a 5 or 10% contribution limit to actually receiving loot, I can see that getting very easily exploited and potentially trolled. For example, let's say they make it at 10%. So to optimize 10%, you need about, say, 6 or 7 people. Any more than that, and you're going to have people who are actually contributing not getting loot because they're doing say 9% of the damage and they're getting cut out. What would potentially happen is you get a large group of people, because this is all open world, of course, and not instance content, that come in, and you have like 20 additional random people all doing like 3%. Now in total you have, say, 30 or 40 people doing, say, 3 or 4% damage each, and then nobody's contributing, right? Because everyone's below the loot threshold. If they are going to go damage based, to make it work, you need a percentage of damage from the top person. So let's say the top person in the raid does 4% of the damage, then everything should be scaled off of that, so that the next person, if someone does, say, 2% of the damage, then they would get contribution for, and if someone only did, say, 1%, then maybe they get the short end of the stick. With regards to the actual looting itself, ping is huge. I understand the concept of being in melee range, getting looting first because they're at increased risk and such, and the fact that there's no range modifiers. So someone at point blank with a bow or with a spell is going to do as much damage as if they're ranged, so there's nothing stopping people from being in melee. With that said, that still makes it so that people with higher pings are at a disadvantage. And I mentioned this specifically to Michael McCarthy, and he said that they could potentially put in a ping modifier. So let's say you had a half-second delay before anybody could loot, where you could look at the items in the loot box but not loot it, and the system would subtract away your ping such that when people actually select it, everyone would select the item at the same time. That, of course, can be exploited as well, where you simply spoof your ping and cut ahead of that queue. So I can see that also being exploited. With regards to the actual knowledge of the items, having good market knowledge of what the items are worth, and more importantly, actually looking at an item and knowing what the item is without having to, say, read through the text, will be kind of a game in itself, actually. And that kind of thing I find is quite interesting. So if you really know your stuff, you can be at an advantage. With regards to having priority looting based on the amount of damage, I am quite for that. One thing in WoW that's always annoyed me is that someone, say, is doing half of your damage, but they can get the same amount of loot as you. Typically, to do more damage, you need to have spent more time, you tend to need to require more skill, and you typically spend more in terms of consumables. So for you to do more damage has cost you more time and effort, but your reward is no different than Scrub B just kind of getting carried, and I've never really liked that concept, so this kind of works to help in that regard. The other thing when you're talking about master loot, Grill, is having a single person kind of master loot in this particular case would be very difficult, given the fact that you're limited to a 7x7 square of inventory slots. If every single mob drops an item that takes up a full slot, you're going to really struggle to have one person master loot. At the very least, you'd probably have to have a few trusted people all master loot and then sort things after the fact. And even then, you can't really do this early on because there's not going to be any trading in the game due to compliance and tech limitations at this point. So there's a lot of stuff to go into depth here, but that's kind of my initial spiel.
Yeah, I think you hit one of the main points I wanted to get into, which is the percentage of damage. Let's say you mentioned 10, or let's say it's set to 5%. That means that the optimal team size would be maybe 15 to 18 people. That's going to change everything. I mean, if team size is dictated by percentage of damage, you're going to see a lot more, I guess, smaller clusters of groups, less mega groups like we did in the last playtest. And it's going to probably make things harder. I mean, I think, it is an antidote on the positive side. You're going to see less groups of 40, 50 walking around and just kind of killing, let's say, the big bosses. Now you're going to see smaller teams, which will have to be more maxed out, better gear, higher mastery, more everything, trying to take on tougher creatures, right? So I think that's going to be interesting. And I think you're going to see a lot more people wanting to be melee. And there's going to mean a lot more deaths. So, Alem, are you bullish on cemeteries yet? That's always an ongoing joke. But I think you're going to see a lot more deaths in general with this system. Alem, do you agree on that?
So in terms of being melee, you only technically would have to be in melee in the last seconds of the fight, which doesn't increase your risk all that much. Like, let's say a boss takes 2 or 3 minutes to kill. You only need to be in melee range in those last few seconds so that you're not at a disadvantage of looting. So the probability that you happen to die or significantly increase risk in those last few seconds isn't all that high. Of course, you don't know the exact boss's damage, so you kind of have to calculate a little bit. No, I'm actually considerably less bullish on cemeteries, mostly because of this kingdom fee I see at eroding at cemetery earnings.
Grill, do you think we're going to see a lot more deaths in general? And I agree with Alem's point. You could do range combat and then kind of circle in on the creature and then go melee for the last bit of it. But how do you think it's going to play out, Grill?
Part of the problem is there's only so much room in melee. You sort of like when we're fighting Mother, that many people in melee, people are just getting boxed out from potentially being, or was jumping and trying to get some swings in, or just pushing yourself through the crowd. It winds up being kind of a clusterfuck where you might be better off actually staying at range. Also, you might have the same issue where there's so many people in melee, you can't get to the thing to loot it. There's a large amount of people, say some random group shows up, a second group, and they're trying to get a piece of it, and now everyone's in melee. You might just get boxed out of loot. You might lose your time. It's another potential issue here. More deaths? Maybe. It all depends on how hard the mobs. If it's like Mother, where she just walks around and starts one-tapping people, yeah, I see more than a fair share of melee deaths. Though if you were arranged with her, you weren't much safer. She was super quick. It depends on how the mobs work, how defenses work. There's still not much info or anything on tanking, which I know I'm particularly interested in. There's not really been anything released about it. So yeah, I'm not so sure about the extra deaths in melee. I think a good skilled player, given room, could probably avoid death most of the time. I mean, if there's no way to express skill, then melee is going to feel pretty bad in general.
I think we're going to see just a ridiculous amount of loot griefing or bottom feeding where, let's say you're crypto tax lawyer and you follow a high level group of elves on a raid. Again, you could just throw in a bit of damage from range and then jump in and grab loot, right? I think you're going to see a lot of players, especially more single players, try to do that strategy. How do you guys think that's going to play out?
Yeah, well, there's nothing you can do to stop people from kind of following you. The only way that I could see that potentially working is, let's say there's a lot of mobs between you and a particular boss. You could kind of make it part way in with nobody around you, and then wait till the mobs behind you kind of spawn and hope that they can't be leashed on top of you to kind of put a barrier, kind of like a barrier buffer between you and the boss, so they would at least have to fight through those mobs. Now, of course, in the last playtest, that was the opposite effect, where those mobs could then be pulled into the boss and made the boss encounters that much more difficult. But I see that happening. Grill would also mention on a thing where it would be kind of griefing having a bunch of people around a mob and not being able to loot it. I could see like large groups of people kind of stacking on top of a mob, so you literally cannot click on the mob. And after a period of time, if nobody loots that mob becomes free loot to everyone. So those people could potentially grief bosses or other high value targets without contributing to them at all. Yeah, I see this loot system having a lot of potential exploits and a lot of ways to kind of troll people. I like the general concept and what they're trying to go there, but it needs to be improved significantly.
I think you're going to see a lot of the same issues. While there is some improvements, a lot of the same things we had an issue with in the last playtest not really being that different. I think you're going to see a lot of the same general griefing, loot issues. Not particularly actually looking forward to that much. After a while, it just became an annoying headache, honestly.
Let's hit the biggest explosive pain point by far, which is going to be legendary and ancient drops, right? NFTs. I think when it comes to the Materium, I think that's going to be fine, or, ores and herbs and things like that. I think that's cool. I don't anticipate a lot of problems, but if they start dropping an NFT that's worth $100,000, that's when you're going to see a lot of emotional reactions, to say the least. So let's address that. And Grill, how do you think that's going to play out?
I'm going to uninstall and never play again when that happens. No. How do I think it's going to play out? I think my game experience tells me that for the most part, things should probably be okay. But you get somebody who doesn't have a lot of money, or doesn't make a lot of money, or lives someplace where $100,000 is completely life changing. Why would they not just take that NFT, grab it, and never show up again? I mean, that's life-changing to them, right?
Yeah, that's going to happen to a certain degree for sure.
Oh, it's definitely going to happen. 100%, that's going to happen. With something like that, me personally, I'd say we put in a guild wall and use it for the guild to further progress us in the game. But somebody who's making 5,000-10,000 USD a year sees something that's worth $100,000, and they see their whole life and family and everything being changed. What's their incentive to not just run with it? I wouldn't even blame them. I would feel terrible from my standpoint, where I'm trying to make things as fair as possible for our guild, but I can't blame somebody for just running off with something like that and selling it.
Elam, thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. You're definitely going to see this kind of stuff happen. And my biggest thing, and I guess Grill, if you're still in the Philippines, is going to be affecting you too, is ping is going to be a huge issue. The fact that someone could get far better loot than myself just because they live closer to the server is absolutely painful. When it comes to the very rarest of NFTs, so like you said, with Materium and stuff, I don't see that being as much of an issue, especially the fact that they're going to be splitting Materium stacks, and most herbs and ores and stuff that would be on a mob, that's going to average out over the course of players and such. I don't see that being as much of an issue. It's only the issue of the really rare single NFT on a particular rare boss or high value mob of high rarity. And yeah, it's going to cause issues for sure. And even if you personally don't really mind somebody potentially grabbing that NFT and doing the old loot and scoot, a lot of other people will. And that causes a lot of issues within a guild setting, and especially if that happens to be someone who's not within the guild. Picture the the lucky Canadian coming in who just barely hits the threshold for contribution because he does a ton of damage in the last few seconds, and he just happens to grab that one high rarity NFT when there's like 20 other guild members in the group who get stuck with a bunch of trash items and a bit of material. It's going to cause more problems for sure. They need to find a better way of working it. I agree with Grill. I'm very pro personal loot. McCarthy was somewhat against personal loot, saying that some potential good items could rot on the bosses and people not know about it. Well, nobody really ever complains if that one of one NFT rots on a mob and nobody ever knew that the mob dropped it. They'd be like, oh, we just didn't get good loot. Okay, no big deal. But people definitely complain if somebody ninjas that super rare item, or they don't give, or there's some other unfair advantage as to why someone gets that item over somebody else. Those things cause problems. Now, maybe they want a little bit of contention within the game, and they're intentionally putting some of these systems to get people interested and such. Like, certainly with the last playtest, having some guild drama between various guilds added a lot to the game. And people would probably agree with that. So who knows? Maybe they want a little bit of contention added to the game, but when it comes to loot, it's going to be a problem. I can tell you right here, right now, that there will be problems if the current system is implemented.
I can confirm that McCarthy and the devs absolutely love the guild drama. I actually asked them that. Yeah, and it adds a lot of fun and excitement, and war unites us. So we're pumped about that. On the plus side, we actually were talking about this like in Codex 1, which is kind of a little bit of a newsletter we create for Dynasty Council members. I think it's going to favor guilds in a big way. And I think being part of trusted parties, and obviously, yeah, you're going to get some people that are going to, let's say, basically steal a one-on-one NFT and never to be found again, or sell it and create a new account. That's going to happen. But I think in the long run, being part of a guild that's got a good system to redistribute the rare items or whatever is going to be paramount. And I think it's going to favor us dramatically. So I think that's the plus side of it. But is there going to be drama? Undoubtedly. Grill, any further thoughts on this?
Killing a monster and finding that big piece loot is one of the biggest rushes that comes along with these type of games. The only thing I think that could really compare is, at least for me, is when a group, a guild, we were doing server first bosses in WoW. That's some of the biggest rushes, and having that taken away by somebody random is gonna make people want to quit. Like you work for months, possibly grinding up to this boss, and then the crown jewel of all your effort is just gone by some ninja. It's gonna have a wide effect on the whole community if that happens. Yeah, I know we said, I kind of said the same thing, and I almost kind of said the same thing with people here, but like that to me is one of the biggest concerns for me when it comes to loot in the game in general, is that potentially even being there.
Yeah, I think just to give you guys kind of the behind the scenes of the offsite, obviously a lot of us talked in the evening, not the devs, but the people that were invited. And yeah, I think we all like the looting system except for the super rare stuff. And what a lot of us suggested was, well, why not make the one-of-one NFTs RNG, where only one player sees it, and you could still get divided and stuff afterwards. But I think that would be a better system. So with all the more common stuff, I think the existing loot system is interesting and it'll work. But with the one-of-ones or the super rare stuff, why not make that RNG where only one player can see it? It doesn't solve all the problems, but at least, let's say an Alum situation where he's got a bad ping, or you grill in the Philippines, at least it randomizes the fairness, so to speak, and ping is less of an issue for those ultra rare items. What's your thoughts on that system, guys? Elam?
So further on to what you're saying there, they can also do like weighted RNG rolls. So let's say you do 5% of the damage and someone else does 3% of the damage. Well, you could have, 5 divided by 3 increased chances of the weighted dice going in your favor. So that they can work with that and still being completely fair to the damage-based system. Another thing that we haven't really talked on at all, which we probably should, is regards to being damage only, completely makes a different way of looting and loot contribution and earning potential for the support classes, which we can probably go into a little bit in the future here. But yeah, no, I think if they're going to do RNG based, which I agree with, that it should be weighted RNG.
I'm a fan of that. I think I suggested that a long time ago. And as you mentioned, I think with the support classes, the only way that's going to really work, I mean, McCarthy talks about people going to a tavern and hiring the healers. I think that's going to be a pretty rare occurrence. I think what's going to happen, which has always been kind of Mom's plan, is building teams or even funding teams. You go raid and then you divide the loot, right? And I think that's how it's going to play out, because you want to have those support classes. And one thing we didn't talk about that's interesting, because I brought it up to McCarthy and he said this, and Jason actually brought it up during the AMA and he said this again. And I said, well, what about potions, right? I mean, it's going to be good for the potion market, which I think it will, but it sounds like he wants potions to be a much slower mechanic, where it might take, let's say, 5 seconds to drink the potion, whereas, magic will be instant. So thoughts on that mechanic, Elam?
So I like that. That adds a lot of value to the to like the clerics and priests and that sort of thing. It almost sounds like if you got to spend that time to drink the potion, you kind of have to kind of step back or even get kind of out of combat while someone else kind of engages, such that you slowly heal up over time. The other thing is, let's say it's not 5 seconds and takes like a minute or two. I would happily have had in the last playtest a potion that took a whole minute to heal me up, as opposed to absolutely nothing out in the middle of nowhere. So I could see that being helpful. The fact that heals can like instantly heal you has an enormous value. And then you have to think about like, how much do the heals and support classes do? Like, can you have one person attacking with like 5 people healing them? Or do you need potentially one healer for a group of, say, 10 people or 20 people? So balancing that out in advance will be interesting to see, and how they determine people's contribution levels from a healing perspective as well. Like, how do you know how much that person's actually healing? Like, how many spells are they casting? Like, could you get a snapshot of their mastery level before the raid and have them take a screenshot of their mastery after the raid and say, oh, well, he cast 15 heals. It cost him 300 Materium to cast those 15 heals, so his value is this, versus the other healer in the group who didn't actually cast any heals at all and was just in the group leeching off everybody. So there needs to be ways of knowing how much actual healing contribution is being done versus how much bard contribution is done versus, again, with, say, the tank. Let's say a tank is sacrificing some of their damage skills to have extra defensive skills. Like, instead of doing their melee swing, they're throwing up their shield to block. Well, that's decreasing their contribution to the boss, right? So that would have to be valued into the contribution within the group. And then you have to worry about the fact that there's no trading or anything early on, and who knows when the trading of items will be allowed as well. So lots of things to consider. Not particularly easy to determine people's individual contributions. Obviously, if there's only one healer and, say, one tank and one bard, it's not as hard. But when you add in multiple, there certainly could be the people kind of just getting carried along with free ride there.
And that's why you want to join the Masters of Materium.com. Click the link in the description, because you're going to want to be part of a great guild that's got good solutions to these problems, which I think we do. One thing to note that we didn't talk about, that McCarthy or didn't really get into in the AMA, that we discussed quite a bit in Austin is that almost everything is going to be database driven. When we talk about 3.0 gaming, there's almost no game other than Star Atlas that's completely on chain. If you own an NFT and you're playing a game like Mirandus, I mean, it's really a 2.1 or a 2.2 game. And that was one of the big conversations that we did day one is like, well, where does Mirandus fall on that spectrum? Is it a 2.1 game or is it a 2.9? Is it a 3.0? Obviously, as soon as you're using something like Unity or Unreal Engine 5, it's no longer a total, just databases involved, right? It can't be completely on chain. So for compliance reasons, and again, I'm going to just leave it at that, they're going to basically have almost everything be database driven. So just to kind of address the point that you mentioned earlier, Ilham, around, are you going to be able to see, you know, all the damage that was done on chain after a fight? The answer is probably not. So anyways, interesting decision. And I agree with them. Before going to Austin, I was going to be, hey, let's try to put everything on Gala chain. And after hearing their legal concerns, I changed my tune. So.
See, I would argue that Gala chain is not a blockchain at all because it's centralized and that doesn't meet the definition of a blockchain. So I'd say, honestly, it's not any different.
You're not alone in that opinion. I think, Gro, we have one final clip and then we'll wrap it up.
We do. We kind of discussed some of it earlier, but it's I can play the clip, but we can just kind of wrap up here. Is about the resets / seasons.
This is something, you know, that you guys are all familiar with when a game goes into alpha or even beta. You know, it's like the world gets reset. We are, after the last tech test, you guys were just asking us, hey, can you just leave the build up? Can you just leave the build up? And the answer is, we are getting close to being able to do that for you. Jason's doing a hard no. It does not mean it will be up all the time. But what it means is that we can leave it up, you know, for a week, and you guys can play it all week, but we'll likely need to be able to take it down, fix something, fix the tuning, and bring it back up online so you guys can continue to play it. But we'll make the commitment to you that it'll be up as long as possible. This next test, after we get through the you know, the field of battle, if you will, and we're ensuring that the back end is holding up, once we go live with your ability to play to earn inside the game, we will keep that up for a week. And if that's working well and it's getting tuned well, then what we'll do is we'll keep it live for 2 weeks and we'll give you more zones to play in, then 3 weeks. And our goal by the end of the year is that you have a game that has an entire month of play and zones in it by the end of this year, including deed placement, building placement, kind of the core mechanics of the game will all be there, and you'll have a month of play. You will keep anything that you earn during this time. You know, again, guys, we have to take stuff down, retune it, and fix it, but you will keep all of the Materium that you acquire. You will keep any ancient NFTs that you find in the world. There's kind of, if you kill a boss monster and there's things that are so powerful that they kind of transcend time and space, they will last through the resets. So even though there's these resets happening, you will be able to keep certain things. A Lantern of the Sun is an ancient class item, right? You'll be able to find and keep certain things in the game that will make you more powerful and give you a head start, even though we're resetting the world.
Yeah, exciting. I mean, I'm pumped about it. One thing that is interesting too is every season, once the deeds are activated, every season is going to be a land rush. So that means first come, first serve, whoever drops their deeds are going to be able to benefit from that. So yeah, thoughts on this, Grill? What's your opinion on the seasons and specifically land rushing every single time?
Land rushes are always exciting. And I thankfully, I don't think I really have too much competition. There's only a few Archdukes around. I think this would be too much of a rush to drop it. It's going to be more like go find a nice spot, try it out, and then maybe try something different another time if as we play something looks better. Yeah, I like the idea of seasons. I do like that you get to keep the Materium. I don't think they were going to take that away from you at all anyway. And the most exciting part is really the ancient class or powerful NFTs that you'll be earning that will make it so restarting is a little easier and quicker each time. That said, I am still looking forward mostly to a permanent release where things are not reset, where you can achieve those really top levels of both mastery and gear. That's the kind of things that really excite me in these games. Not so much the early stages.
Ellen, thoughts on land rushing and seasons?
I like it. It gives keeps the game fresh for sure. It also gives a significant advantage for people who have been playing. So you kind of know the good areas, and you also potentially know the way to make it to that deed location quicker than other people. Some places maybe not the easiest to reach. Maybe you have to even level up your character and gear up and stuff to make it to those locations. So people that are, potentially better players would have an advantage in that regard as well, which I like. With regards to the actual land rush, you're saying really you probably wouldn't have that much competition. Based on what I've been hearing, they only have 3 deed sizes, so small, medium, and large, and obviously an Archduke would be a large, which would mean you'd probably be in competition with other people, like other towns. And my guess is that probably all the towns would be the large. So you'd likely be not 40 different people, because some people own, multiple towns and such, but you would probably have competition against like 30 other people to place that deed. With regards to the smaller deeds, the only downside that I can see is some of your deeds could be quite spread out, more so than you would really want it to. And that'll make the logistics a little bit difficult between places. Like, let's say you have a farming hamlet in one spot, and then on the complete other side of the zone, you have another farming hamlet. Trying to get your resources from one place to another to your town to process and stuff is going to add an additional layer of complexity, which I do like the complexity, but it also makes it much more inefficient. And I'm also very fond of having things very efficient. So we'll have to see how all that plays out. But overall, I do like the fact that they're going to have these multiple land rushes. It gives people who didn't have a chance to place things previously a chance to place it. People that are sticking with the game, gives them a reason to continue sticking with the game. And overall, I like the idea and where they're going with it.
Yeah, I suspect that we're probably still a year and a half away from, let's say, mastery getting turned on and all those things. And we were talking in our Discord, how many zones do we need to make the game, let's say, to start officially? I mean, even 100 zones, it's going to feel a little cramped to put every single deed out there. So I think we're ways away from them basically turning everything on, unless they get really good at creating zones and create some sort of zone creation system or something. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see them being able to, if they're making one zone at a time manual, I don't see them ever getting enough zones to come close to making it. They need some sort of automated tool for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, it's been almost 3 hours, so we'll wrap it up here. Again, mastersofmaterium.com. We are the biggest guild. We are the best guild. And again, if you don't want to be part of bad guilds that don't have a good system to deal with the loot problems, join us. We are working on fair, equitable solutions where everybody will be happy. And yeah, I think the future is bright. I'll just wrap up by saying this. I mean, I went into Austin with high hopes, and I left with I'm even more bullish than I've ever been. So I think McCarthy's vision, if they leave McCarthy alone, so Gala, if you're listening, please leave McCarthy alone. If they leave McCarthy alone, I think we're all set. That's really where I'm at. Thank you. Thanks for listening. And we're going to have a really cool special guest. I know this channel has been all about Mirandus, but we will be bringing in Michael Wagner, who's the CEO of Star Atlas, for an interview soon. So make sure you tune into that. I think Star Atlas is one of the few projects that's just been doing almost everything right and has really one of the few functioning, thriving Web3 economies. So we're going to have a lot of fun talking to Michael. And yeah, stay tuned. Thank you.